Well, hello everyone, and welcome to episode 58 of the Yorkshire Gamers Elite Big War Games podcast. And today is going to be a terrain special, something we've not really spoken about too much on the podcast over the years. And my guest is Joe Bilton, aka Joe Wargamer from the X or the Twitters, as everyone in the world still prefers to call it. Sorry, Elon, but it's going to be Twitter forever, mate. And if you don't know Joe, if you haven't seen his stuff, he is superb at making terrain. He's only been in the hobby for 5 or 6 years, as we're going to hear very shortly, but he's really made an impact with some of the tables that he's put on at Wargame shows and at Lard Days. So sit back and look forward to that in a few minutes when we're going to get really deep on some terrain. The last couple of episodes with Nick Jellicoe, I think personally, are some of the best that I've ever done. With anything that I do that's slightly off topic in terms of wargaming, viewer figures drop. So if you haven't given it a go, I do think you should. I think I really enjoyed doing those episodes. Both of us really into the subject, really discussing the topics involved. So even if you're not into World War One naval, I think it's worth a listen. And it's free, of course, so give it a go. Just prior to doing this recording, just after doing this recording, in fact, it was the Partisan show. So there's a couple of references to that in the interview. And I have to say, it was a fantastic day out. It's the first time that I have put a game on at Partisan, and I was honoured, let me say that word, to be involved in it because Partisan is the showcase for the best games in the country. You know, different conventions have different things going for them. You know, salute, size, different types of manufacturers and exhibitors who you wouldn't normally see. 8,000 people there, whereas Partisan is like a condensed group of some of the best games going. Charles Roundtree's Omaha game, absolutely out of this world. Well done, Charles. It was absolutely amazing. I only got to see it for about 30 seconds, but it looked fantastic. And hopefully he'll be coming to Fiasco in Leeds in October, and I can spend a bit more time having a more detailed look at that game. And there's so many fantastic games on that floor, and it was like I say, an honour to be there, and I hope to be there in October as well with a bit of an Italian Wars showcase. I'm going to bring all my Italian Wars figures out. They've never been around the country anywhere. They've only been on show or on display in local shows, either Fiasco or Recon. So looking forward to that. Top organisation from the guys who do Partisan. I did really, Lawrence and Tricks. He really did do a fantastic job getting that going, and no hassles whatsoever getting in and out. A really good day. Very, very recommended if you haven't been to Partisan. I think it was the highest numbers ever. There was a real buzz about the show. I was talking to people all day, and it was one of those shows where everyone stayed late into the afternoon. It didn't die off at midday like some shows do. So yeah, great advert for the hobby and a great showcase that the hobby isn't dying out. The hobby, I think, is vibrant. There's lots of characters getting involved in it or being pushed to the surface who are enthusiastic about what they do, and yeah, absolutely fantastic. On top of that, I did a little bit of recording with a podcast from America, 20-sided gamified podcast, and recommended to all if you haven't given it a go yet. They are really enthusiastic guys from America. They're teachers and they use wargaming as an educational tool, something that we have spoken about previously on the podcast. And they've got nearly as many episodes, if not more than me, out at the moment. They're quite prolific, but they're well worth a listen. And the episode I did isn't out yet. We're going to do a little bit more recording because we were short on time when we did it initially. And you know me, I just kept talking. So we're going to do a little bit more recording towards the end of the month, and hopefully that will be out for you to listen to. So give that a tune in. 20-sided gamified podcast. Well worth a listen. And then my mate Alex Sutherland from Storm of Steel, I did a little bit of an interview with him, and also Martin from Seventh Son, and just around starting wargaming, historical wargaming, etc., in a kind of podcast discussion type format. And not sure how or what Alex is going to do with it, but I'm sure it's going to be out and available soon. So, sorry for that long introduction, but there's lots to talk about, and it's time for that main feature. So, get yourself a cup of tea, get yourself some flock, some grass tufts, a bit of a weathering wash, and sit back and enjoy Joe Bilton. He is really enthusiastic about his hobby. He's only been doing it for 5 years, but he has really made a difference to the standard of our terrain, and he's really enthusiastic about how to do it, how to improve it, how to make it look realistic, and he's got some great thoughts upon what makes good terrain. So have a listen, and hopefully, as I did, you will learn something. So get yourself a cup of tea, packet of biscuits, and off we go. Without further ado, here's the interview. Okay, everyone, welcome to episode 58 of the Yorkshire Gamer podcast. And over the last couple of episodes, we've had a deep dive into the Battle of Jutland from a historical perspective. So today, it's time to get back firmly on the Wargames table and talk about some proper Wargames stuff instead of all that history rubbish. So, terrain is a vital part of our hobby, and one that turns a gaming table from an old table football game cloth in with some figures on into a realistic diorama in which we can all enjoy our games. The recent Partisans show yesterday was a perfect example of how a great terrain can lift a table to another level. Today's guest has become well known for his excellent work on his own terrain, and his pictures on Twitter have inspired many to up their own terrain game. His recent table at Salute was a smash hit, with the game packed with all players all day enjoying water tanker in the ruins of a World War II city, with downed planes, damaged buildings, and lots of scatter everywhere. Do you know your MDF from your resin? What random objects can you steal from around the house and liberate to turn into tabletop features? Can you get excited about scatter terrain, and what makes a good grass tuft? These questions and many more will be answered over the next hour or so as we speak to our guest, Joe Bilton. Hi, Joe.
Hello.
Uh, so you're well known on the Twitters as Joe the Wargamer.
Joe Wargamer, yeah.
Yeah. So did you find that most people don't know your surname and just go Joe the Wargamer?
They do, partly because I've written articles for WSS, and so I put my surname there. But yeah, just Joe Wargamer is often. I have that. That's what I've got on my polo shirt as well. So
Yeah. What have you got on your bank card? Joe Wargamer or Joe Bilton?
I might, if I get a new card, I might change it. I say, well, oh hello, Mr. Bank Teller. Do you recognise me from Twitter? You know?
Yeah, exactly. And everyone should, mate, and everyone should. We had a quick, very brief chat before we started, and you mentioned you'd done a couple of podcasts in the past, but
Yeah.
on a different topic. We'll go into the details of that topic in the past, but you are in the future. Sorry, so you are familiar with the podcast format and what
Yes.
the story is and everything.
Yeah.
Excellent, excellent. Well, we're going to entertain our guests over the next God knows how long. You never know with these things. I'm sure while people sat painting or commuting, they're going to enjoy our conversation. So before we get going, the first thing that I do is I do the 4-minute challenge, and
Hmm.
that's our little attempt at you to summarise your wargaming history in 4 minutes. So any prep done?
What, for this 4 minutes?
Yeah, for the 4
No,
minutes.
because
No.
actually because as you'll find out in the next 4 minutes, my wargaming career is quite recent, quite short.
Ah, excellent. Well, I'll press the start button. I'll
Oh, you're
hold.
genuinely timing it. All right, okay.
Oh yeah. Oh,
I thought it was
just
an approximate 4 minutes. All right.
well. To be fair, most of my guests do approximately 4 minutes,
Okay.
and some go to like 7 or 8. But I do wave the phone in front like that
Okay.
just to try
I
and
will.
remind people. I used to
Sure.
have a little thing that came on that told them to shut up after 4 minutes, but unfortunately that doesn't work anymore. So I'll press the button and off you go, Joe.
Okay. Right. So I guess ignoring my early childhood when I used to make airfix models and things, and I've always liked military history, but I didn't do any sort of modeling, like modeling, but as in airfix modeling for about 25 years or so. And then about 5 years ago, I thought, I know what I'll do. I will make some airfix tanks, get some scale model tanks, do that again. And I was Googling to see what sort of came up. And I came across an advert for bolt action warlord tanks. And I was like, I've never considered playing with the models. I could like make the models and then play with the models. So I was like, I'll try that. So I picked up a warlord starter set of British and Germans or whatever, and I painted them up. And this is about 5 years ago, I guess. And I was like, this is now my life defined. Now the next like few decades of my life, I found a true purpose. So jumped straight in, sort of 2 feet straight into it. And I played bolt action for the first, I guess, like 8 months or so. And I really enjoyed it. And I very quickly went from the start set up to huge numbers of things already, sort of thing. And then I was my mate Tom Egan in Ireland. I was talking to him, and he also played bolt action. And we thought, let's learn chain of command. Right, let's do that. So we did a series of tutorial games together where we played small scenes from chain of command. Like, okay, how do you do tank combat? How do you do snipers, whatever sort of thing, and taught ourselves that. And then I then switched wholesale to chain of command. And then from there, I just snowballed into doing more and more terrain. I really enjoyed the terrain aspects of things. And then 3 years ago, I went to my first lard event, which was Oozing Lard in Bedfordshire, and that was brilliant. And I was like, this is fantastic. I love this. This is great. And then I just now spend all my time making terrain. I run Hearts of Lard in March in Rickmansworth. I go to as many lard days as I can, which isn't many when I've got a young family, but I go to as many as I can. And yeah, I just now my house is just full of terrain and tanks and minis and stuff, and I'm super pleased that I found this hobby because it really appeals to me on all different levels, history levels and crafting things and playing games with mates and all that sort of stuff. So so it's quite a brief.
That's good. That's good. We've got 1 minute and 6
a minute left.
Oh, that's good. That's good. You're not forced to do 4 minutes.
No, could make up things.
Some people do 12 minutes, and I'm waving at them, and they just keep going. So that's
well,
that's very good.
I'm restoring the average for all your shows.
Yeah, that's very good indeed. Now, if you don't mind me saying, most of my guests are from the older wargaming generation.
Yeah.
So I'm not after your pin number or anything, but just roughly how old are you, Joe?
I'm 42.
42. Okay, so you are on the younger side.
On the younger side, but I'm feeling less young. I'm feeling young, like that Hearts of Lord, there was some guys who were like in their 20s, and I was like, now I feel like an old man. Yeah. But yeah,
well, for the benefit of the listeners, I'm recording this the day after Partisan, and I on my own lugged my massive. I've got terrain boards that are like 2 inches thick. They're very old school and they're really heavy. And I lugged those into the show, out of the show, back into my house. So I ache everywhere today. I'm really tired. And my wife just said to me, she said, "Oh, you keep making little noises like an injured mouse." every time I move.
Well,
So I'm
after Salute this year, I was, I've been standing. I arrived at 7 in the morning, sort of thing, to set up and things, and I was standing the entire day. And when I got home, I was like, oh my god, I cannot move my legs. I am everything hurts. I'm so stiff.
yeah, it's amazing how tired and achy you can get from
Mm,
just standing at a
yeah,
war game
yeah,
show all
yeah,
day. And I'm not Mr. Marathon Man or anything like that, but I walk quite a lot, and my
yeah,
job involves walking around all most of the time. So it's amazing how just standing there and
yeah,
talking to people can be so exhausting. But I'm glad you feel it. Well, not glad you feel it,
yeah.
Tom. I'm
Thanks. Yeah, I
joking.
hope
I'm
you're
not trying
suffering too.
to. Yeah, you're suffering as well at a younger age. Just imagine what it's like at
Yeah,
my
yeah,
age.
yeah,
So you mentioned Tom Egan there
yeah.
from he's big on the Twitter, and I met Tom at Salute. So how did you meet Tom?
It was through Twitter. It was
Hmm,
um, not long after I sort of joined Wargame Twitter. I saw he had a post about what had he done? He was in Normandy with his dad, and he had put some
right.
pictures up saying, "Oh, here's my holiday snapshot sort of thing." And I had replied to that saying, "Oh yeah, 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 I've been to there too, and that's it's a great place or whatever." And then we started talking about hobby things and whatever and stuff, and then we just really really clicked. And
Yeah,
he's a soldier. He's in the Irish Army, so he was at the time he got deployed for 6 months overseas, sort of thing. And so we would have like Zoom games, and it was like lockdown time, so we'd have Zoom games and things. And then just became really good mates. And then I went to visit
mm,
him in Ireland, stayed at his for a week, and we played what campaign was it? The Operation Martlet pint-sized
yeah.
campaign in a weekend, in a week. Yeah, it's just really good mates.
Oh, but yeah, he's a lovely lad. Like I say, I met him at Salute, and
Yeah.
similar to yourself, I've had a lot of contact with him on Twitter. Yes, I know it's called X now,
No,
everybody,
no, no,
but
no.
like
It's not.
I
It's
say,
Twitter. No,
it's
never.
it's got.
It will never be that. Never be X.
Yeah, yeah, Elon Musk might be the richest man in the world, but he's potentially the worst at marketing because
Yeah,
still everyone calls it Twitter.
yeah,
I'd just give up, mate, and call it Twitter because nobody calls it X. Even the BBC News says
yeah,
Twitter.
yeah. Formerly Twitter. Yeah, so, yeah.
So it doesn't particularly work very well. Um, so do you have a setup at home where you game, or do you game down a club?
No, I have a really small terrace house, which
Yeah,
is not very conducive to this hobby. Right, so
yeah.
sort of Victorian terrace. So our front room is you can just about fit a 6x4 table as long as you don't want to move really much around it. And so there's nothing permanent in my house. Everything is. I mean, I actually ended up having I have like a storage unit thing, like a big yellow, but it's not big yellow. Um, uh, and I had to basically move because it's in the loft. All my like hobby stuff is up in the loft, right, locked in boxes and stuff, and um, up a little ladder into the hatch, and it hasn't got like a permanent. It's like a small like temporary ladder up into the hatch. Load the
Mm,
boxes down. That's a pain in the ass. So I bought that. I hired this locker thing to keep my stuff, and so I do play at home, but it's a palaver really. And unfortunately as well, there's no local clubs really that do historical wargaming. I'm in Watford, and most of the clubs are like 40k Warhammer clubs. So I go to mates' houses if they're nearby. I sometimes have games here, but I don't get as many games as I'd like really because
yeah.
I'm in the wrong house is the essential thing.
Yeah, it's a shame you haven't got a club or something nearby. You
It
probably
really is.
do, but it's just
Yeah, I mean,
finding them really.
there's a couple that are a few hours away, like an hour away, sort of thing. But also at the same time, because I've got a young family, um, often the nights that their clubs are on,
Yeah.
I'm doing like take my kids to brownies or dance classes kind of things, and so I'm sort of taking I'm only 42 as previously mentioned, and when I'm 52, I presume those duties will have finished.
Yeah. Yeah, I think for many people it's a cycle that people go through,
Mm,
and they might, when having a young family, limit their not limit, but change the way that their hobby is done, and it might be more solitary, and it might be more preparation and painting and building of
Yeah,
armies and stuff, because you've got those commitments to your family, and then as your family grow, one of my good friends from when we were teenagers, Simon Weinberger, came to play partisan in the game yesterday, and his kids are now just doing their A levels, so his time commitment to driving them around everywhere has
yeah.
dropped off. So he's starting to come back into the hobby again, which is great to see. So it's a cycle that many people go through, I think. So you're definitely not alone in that. You mentioned earlier on, and we're going to talk a little bit about Lardy's rule sets and stuff like that later
Yeah.
on. But you mentioned that you started with bolt action, which is often seen as a drug references. It's a
Yeah.
gateway set of rules. So, what was the? Obviously, I think you mentioned it was where talking with Tom and building that sort of rapport and going through that. What differences do you see between chain of command and bolt action, and why you went with chain of command in the long run?
I think one thing that sort of bothered me about bolt action was two main things. Two main things that were addressed by chain of command. One was the battles never seemed to really end in a realistic way. So
Right.
you sort of you'd have, because there was no overall force morale tracking in bolt action. You would have, depending on your opponent, you might like play to the last man, right? Like
Right.
literally have one bloke left, and they've got like 6 tiger tanks coming towards you, and and this one guy just keeps dodging behind. Like there was no mechanism for going, well, do you know what, this battle's clearly over. What was the point of carrying on? And the other thing was that there was no fog of war. There was no way of concealing your plans. Like, you all sort of appeared on the table edge and on you come. And if you want to set up an ambush, well, your blokes are on the table with the ambush marker next to them. It's like, well, I know where they are. I'm not ever going to go to that junction. I am literally never going to run across that junction because I know you're there.
I'm not familiar. I have to say, I'm not familiar with bolt action. But the person who's doing an ambush actually has a marker down that says ambush.
They have the bloke on the table, and they have the ambush dice next to them saying ambush.
Yeah.
I played this game with my brother-in-law, and it was like not long after I started playing, and it was like a Soviet village, and he thought he'd do a great plan, right? He pushed these blokes up from the table edge, and he made them run over like about 15 turns to this house, right? All this effort to get these blokes into this crossroads, and he went, aha, and he put an ambush marker there, right? They're ambushing this junction. It's like, well, mate, I'm not coming down that junction now. And so he was pissed off because the whole game I just went somewhere else, right? So I was like, well, and I tried then writing my own like rules because I hadn't encountered chain of command yet. I tried writing my own rules to remedy that. Okay, let's have blinds. Let me have like, okay, so when you place your ambushes, you get to place 3 blind tokens or whatever sort of thing, and whatever. And I was like, well, now I'm going to have to rewrite all the rules, and that's stupid, right? I'm not interested in writing a set of rules. So then with chain of command, what happened was me and Tom were playing bolt action, and we're like, well, do you know what would be quite good is to play Operation Martlet, but as bolt action, right? And I was like, do you know what? Actually, that's a lot of hassle. I might as well just learn chain of command, right? What's the point? Because I liked all the campaign management stuff. At the sharp ends and tracking your casualties and tracking your CO's opinion and all that sort of stuff, and the influence of those things. So I just went, let's just play chain of command. Let's just learn chain of command. So I really like the fact that with the jump off points, you have actually an element of fog of war. You don't know where they're going to deploy, roughly, but that's quite realistic. Sort of know the enemy are in this area. What they're going to have, when they're going to deploy it, how they're going to appear. You can genuinely ambush people with things. I also really like the fact that there are consequences for losing troops. The overall force morale actually matters, right? It's not just a case of, oh, I've got 10 blokes, you killed all 10 blokes, now I've lost. It was actually, oh, you've hit a leader or you've lost a vehicle, and those things actually play a role in that. Plus, I also like, as my third thing I like about chain of command, is the fact that you actually have to make decisions on things, and it doesn't always go to plan, right? So obviously, bolt action's got this blind bag mechanism where you pull out a dice, and it might be your coloured dice, or it might be your opponent's dice, but you always know that in that turn, all your vehicles, all your soldiers will act. Might not be first, but they will all definitely have a go. And you also know how far they're going to move. Oh, this moves 6 inches, this whatever and stuff, right? And so you could like make decisions based on the fact that, well, I've had 3 dice out. The next 3 are going to be mine definitely, and I can definitely reach this building. So it affects my judgment. Whereas in Chain of Command, you don't necessarily get the right dice for all things. You have to make the best judgment with the dice you've got. You're not guaranteed that you won't get interrupted as you're crossing the way, or you might be lucky in double phase and you do get across. And that friction, that variety, actually gives you genuinely interesting tactical decisions to make.
Yeah, excellent. It's it's just interesting to get that perspective. You know me, I'm a more of a big scale gamer, so I don't necessarily play these particular sets of rules, but I do understand how Chain of Command works, and I do appreciate the work that's gone into it. And I know Rich and Nick are very keen to make their rules as realistic as possible whilst remaining playable. And I'm not familiar with bolt action at all. I regularly take the mick out of it, but that's what this show is all about, taking the mick out of things. So that's lovely to hear that. Have you stuck mostly with World War II, or have you stepped outside that period?
I'm actually as I discovered by meeting more wargamers, I think I'm a bit of a rarity in terms of I just play World War II in 28mm. Yeah. That's it, right? So it's not that I don't like other theatres and wars and rule sets and things, and I would happily play them. But I think part of the driving factor is I've got, like I said, this little house and limited storage, and there's so much of World War II that you can tap into, and I've got finite time to do stuff. I don't mean like my whole life. I mean like, like in my week, right? I'm not like oh god, I've only got 40 years left. So I sort of like have taken the decision of I'm going to stick with World War II. So I only play World War II in 28mm, and my goal is essentially to cover all theatres over the next 40 years. So that's the plan, right?
There you go.
Yeah, it's ambitious, right? But yeah, I think there's enough scope and variety in World War II to cover. I sort of thought about as a very small sidestep doing naval or aerial sort of dogfighting.
Yeah,
right, because that's adjacent to what I play. I would happily. I would have played like 15mm, except what I started with was 28mm, and so I'm not going to reinvent everything and do everything again in a smaller scale. But I do like the look of 15 and 20mm tables. But
well, I could definitely say that naval wargaming has a lot less terrain in it.
Yeah, yeah. I saw your table. Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of one of those things where you look at the table and you think, oh, terrain wise, it could do with a little bit more, but then you kind of think to yourself, it's a fucking massive battle in the middle of the sea.
Yeah,
I'm not going to put a finely sculpted island with a Greek temple on it just to lift the table.
Yeah.
This is the largest sea battle in World War One in the middle of the North Sea, and it's just sea, mate. That's all you're going to get. Sea and 248 ships. You're not going to get any more.
No.
So
I think also a Greek temple would look quite out of place in the North Sea.
Yeah. But there we go. I won't go into the palm tree story. That's for another day.
Okay.
So there's a couple of things to chat about, kind of outside of what we're going to talk about a little later on. And the first thing's kind of just occurred to me really after your introduction, and that's kind of new people coming into the hobby. So, did you find it hard to get into historical wargaming?
Well, I got into it, essentially not long before all the COVID lockdown things
Yeah,
happened, and at that time, suddenly everyone was having to find ways to play online with their
yeah,
mates, right?
mm,
And so I wasn't faced with the issue of I don't know what clubs to go to or I'm playing on my own, because suddenly everyone was like, well, let's play online. And so all my first games outside of like playing with family, they were all Zoom games. And so that was quite good, because I joined Twitter about the same time I got into wargaming, and people started talking about virtual lards. Jeremy organises these virtual lard events at the time, and so I joined some of those, and I was like, this is really fun. Like, actually,
mm,
it's a hassle. It is a hassle to sort of set up the cameras, right, and
yeah,
whatever and stuff. But at the time, it was like, well, it's that or play with no one. So sort of do that, and then once I got into Chain of Command, the community online was huge, and
mm,
I was like impressed by how welcoming and how quick it was, and people straight away talking about playing virtually and stuff. And as soon as lockdowns lifted and Lard Day started again, I was like
mm.
straight down there, and Ali Campbell organised the one in Bedford, and that was great. I met other people, and that led to some more games like outside of Lard Day things.
Mm. I think there's a misconception that the historical wargaming sort of community is quite stuffy and doesn't let new people in. But it sounds to me that isn't what you came across.
No, I've not found that at all. It's been, you know, like amazingly welcoming. And like, I've only wargamed for a handful of years, sort of thing, and I don't ever feel like an outsider or and I've been to things where people, at events and shows and stuff, where they all know each other really well, and we've played together for 15, 20 years, sort of thing. But it's never felt like I wasn't then welcome or part of that straight away. So it's good.
Yeah, that's really good to hear, because I think some in any walk of life, there are gardeners who are really great guys who will have a laugh and a joke and a cup of tea with you, and there are gardeners who are twats. And it's exactly the same. And it's exactly the same in wargaming. It's
Yeah,
exactly the same in hairdressers.
yeah, yeah,
You go to a hairdresser and have a chat with them for ages, like your best mates, and then you'll go to another hairdresser and they'll just cut you hair and not say anything to you
yeah,
and
yeah,
go
yeah.
£10 or whatever, and that's it. So
It's £15 down in the south, mate.
is it right?
Yeah.
I was struggling to remember how much a haircut cost then, but I thought I covered it up quite well. So, uh, so, what is there anything that I mean? We didn't talk about this before we started, and I didn't send this as a question to you. So apologies if I put you on the spot or anything. But is there anything that you think that wargaming in general could do to bring more people in? Are we targeting? Where do wargaming as a hobby target new people to come in?
I don't know. I think I would say that you have to be of like enough financial security to be able to buy hobby stuff, right? And enough time to do that. So I think most people obviously then get into it at a certain time of life, because like, well,
Mm.
I'm not like fresh out of university and trying to get a job, and and got no money to spend anything on, because it's quite expensive, the hobby, right? It
Yeah,
can
it
be quite
can be.
expensive.
Yeah.
And so I think you're not gonna get anyone. Although, do you know what? Though, at the same time, though, I guess young blokes do spend an awful lot of money on Games Workshop
Yeah, they do.
stuff, right?
Mm.
And they are, you know, these young. I don't know. Like, I guess having maybe like actually having like games at museums and
Mm.
is quite a good one, because there's people are it's military history and wargaming are adjacent hobbies, right?
Mm. Yeah.
And I got into it partly because I liked military history, and I wanted to make models and stuff. So I think if you were to have more of those games days held at a museum, held at historical place, like like Tank Fest or whatever down at Bovington, that they had a hobby tent. I know they had that at what's it? We Have Ways Fest. They
Yeah,
had a
yeah,
hobby tent for there, and recently Fat Lardies went to Arnhem last year, was it? And the year before,
yeah,
and ran tables there, right? And so obviously that isn't going to necessarily get a huge number of wargamers because it's quite a small museum. A lot of them were like coach parties of old people sort of who are interested but aren't necessarily going to become wargamers.
yeah,
But I guess part of the thing is that it does look outwardly like a very old man hobby, right?
yeah.
So when you see pictures of wargame shows, most people there are just 60-year-old blokes, right? And it might feel, if you're younger than that, or how do I get into that? But I suppose seeing games done. Well, I mean, actually, that's fair. Salute. There was a decent number of like teenage kids come with their parents.
Yeah.
And they enjoy the game, right? They fully. Those kids are not thinking this isn't for me. They're like, this is fully. I'm playing this game. This is a great fun game. I'm enjoying this and stuff. And I guess maybe encouraging people to bring families to shows and stuff. If you've got some kids or whatever, or you've got like a nephew or whatever, or niece or whatever, that might be interested, and just getting them playing the games. That might be a way to.
Yeah, it's really important to keep the hobby moving. That we do try and look at different ways of and most of them have been tried before and fallen by the wayside. And I think one of the things that's important to be aware of about the hobby is that it's not, we don't have a British society. Well, we probably do, and they'll all sit around
they're
with,
gonna
with pipes going, "There,
yeah.
this. I've not listened to a podcast. Is that on one of those radios?" You know, a British wargaming society, or
Yeah,
something
there's
that
no like
pushes.
committee in charge going, right,
Yeah,
we're in
yeah,
charge of promoting wargaming on behalf of all
yeah.
wargamers.
So everything that's done is done by individuals or by groups of people, and I've spoken to and praised the Lardis very much for this on the podcast in the past, and I try and do a tiny little bit myself, just by engaging with public at the table, but it, we're not. We're just doing it for ourselves and our joy and
No,
love
I
of the
know.
hobby. We're not
Yeah,
trying to push it to create more profit, to get more dividends or anything along those
yeah,
lines. We're just doing it because we love and enjoy the hobby. And I think it's very important for, if we get these families along, like you say, to Sloot or wherever, that their interactions with wargamers is, like yourself, enthusiastic with with the water tanker table that we're going to talk about later on. Oh, come
yeah.
and have a go, or me talking. I always try and take time out with kids and look at it. This is and get them enthusiastic, because they will remember that.
Yeah.
They will. That's their first experience of wargaming. Is me telling them funny stories about tanks or whatever I'm doing. I
Mm.
can't remember what I say half the time. So, but it's
Yeah.
not it's not alcohol. I'll have to say that. Or if it's some grumpy twat going, it's a Panzer III F.
Yeah, don't touch it, mate. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I think we've seen the dip of that, and I think we're coming up, and I think we're getting more
Yeah.
people who are, well, show. I don't want to use the word showman, because that kind of sounds like you're selling snake oil or something. But you've you've got to have characters who
Yeah. Yeah. To
bring
engage.
people into the hobby, and I
Yeah.
think there's more and more of those coming out. So, well, thank you for that. It's nice to have a little chat to somebody who's relatively new to the hobby, about where do we go,
Mm.
and how do we get people in. And I think that obviously you didn't go to Partisan yesterday, but there was a real good buzz yesterday.
Mm.
Really, really busy. It might just have been around the area I was, but everyone seemed to be happy, and we were chatting about
This is
everything.
like the Queen always smelling fresh paint, isn't it? Like,
Yeah, it's just
yeah.
yeah. And we
Outside of
were
your
we were even near the smelly toilets, and we still had a lovely day.
everyone was happy. Yeah.
Yeah, which was, and then I've been to shows maybe 10 years ago where that vibe just wasn't there.
Right. Yeah.
And people had walked round and then bugger off by 12 o'clock, and they come in
Mm.
by some war bases and a couple of 20 mil tanks or something like that, and then go. Whereas everyone was hanging around and chatting yesterday, which was lovely to see. So we'll just talk a little bit, if you don't mind, about your day job, if and maps, because I think when we spoke at the start, your podcasting career has been mostly about maps. So we're going to change that today, and your podcasting today is mostly about wargaming, and we'll do a little side bit on maps, which is coming now. So just kind of explain to the listeners then, what it is you do and what you've been involved in.
So my day job is I make Dungeons and Dragons maps. My company is called Heroic Maps. It's just me and my wife, but it started essentially as a hobby. I used to be a teacher. I was a science teacher for about 15 years, I guess. And as a little side hobby, because I played Hero Quest as a kid, and I picked up years ago. I picked up a secondhand set from eBay. And I was like, oh yeah, it's great. But what always bothered me about the board was it's always so small, the board, right? And when you put the doors on because the wall, the white line for the walls on the Hero Quest board is so thin that if you then put the doors on the walls, you can't like put a bloke by the door, right? So it used to annoy me. It's like, well, this is stupid. These walls are too thin. So what I thought I would do is I would make it out of polystyrene, right? My own Hero Quest board out of polystyrene. So I made this bloody mess, right? It was this big. It was huge. It was oversized. It was stored in these boxes under the bed, and it was stupid, right? It was a waste of time. It didn't look very good, and it was a big storage headache. So my wife said to me, "Well, look, why don't you just draw a thing in Photoshop, right?" Because I'd always use Photoshop. Because I used to, years ago, when I was a teenager, I played the Il-2 Sturmovik flight sim, loads and loads and loads and loads, and I got really into making textures for the aircraft, like the skins for the aircraft. So I would do historically accurate skins for that. So I did a lot of Photoshop stuff then, and so then I was like, okay, that's a good idea. I'll just draw a Hero Quest board and whatever, and then to get it printed, I wanted to get it printed from a print company. And I thought, well, that's going to cost me a bit of money to print it off, sort of thing. So I thought I'd stick it onto Drive-Thru RPG, which is like a website that sells D&D and RPG, materials and stuff, right? And so I put it on there, and we sold like 10, 15 copies in the first month, and I was like, $40. That's good, right? So then I just started, just as a little side thing, making these maps and stuff, and I was like, oh, that's quite cool. And then it kept selling, so I was like, well, this is. And so as I'd work as a teacher in the day, and then in the evenings I would make these maps and stuff. And after about 5 years of doing it, we did a test. We said, well, look, this is actually earning pretty decent money. Can it, in 1 year, match my teacher salary?
Yeah.
And it did. All right. And I was like, well, then, I'm gonna start. I love teaching. I loved it so much. Right, I thought the kids were brilliant, and I loved the subject, and I really enjoyed teaching. But if I could be at home and self-employed, and not have like SLT management over me, sort of thing, right? I was like, well, why not? So we tried it. I said, let's just go for it. We've shown that this year we've done enough. It can match my salary. So, and at worst, I can return to teaching, easily, right? Because there's always a shortage of teachers. So I stopped teaching, and I started making these maps full time, and I've been doing it since. So essentially, what I do is I make battle maps at 28mm scale, either for printing or for using in VTTs like Roll20 or Foundry. And I do dungeons and castles and forests and elven palaces and whatever stuff. I've done about 1,500 maps now over the last 10 years, and I've done things for Kickstarters and whatever and stuff. Yeah, and it's very cool. It's a very different job, I think.
So where does most of the work that you do, is it done for yourself to sell through places like Wargames Vault, or you commissioned for stuff?
Well, I did do commissions originally, like private commissions, but it was a bit of a headache because, for a start, people often wouldn't recognise how much time went into and therefore wouldn't want to pay. So I say, okay, and it's always really hard to give prices for like freelance commission work stuff,
Yeah.
right? You're like, well, am I overcharging? Am I undercharging? Where do I put it? And so I would give prices, and someone would go, oh, I just wanted to pay $10. It's like, well, it's going to take me 6 hours. I'm not doing it for $10, right?
Yeah.
And so I didn't like. Plus, also, then you do a thing, and the person would go, "Oh, could you change this thing?" And it's like, well, you didn't say that at the time. So I try and avoid commissions, and I'm lucky enough now that our income from the sales, we have a Patreon as well, means I don't have to do commissions. But I have done commissions for Kickstarters and like projects people are doing, and they approach me and they say, "Could you do the maps for this book or for this campaign?" But generally, I just make the maps that I'm interested in making and put them onto drive-through and so of that.
So I believe you did some maps for the Far East campaign for the largest book. Is that right?
Yeah, and I did the maps in the DPA 2 book as well. I did the maps in Strength and Honor, Mark Backhouse's Strength and Honor book. Yeah, so Richard. So what happened was, I did what's it called? The Bazooka Town PSC in the Lard magazine Christmas one about 3 years ago, and I did maps for my tables for that. And then from that, on the back of that, Richard contacted me and said, "Would I mind? Am I free to do maps for supplements and stuff, pint-sized campaigns and whatever and stuff?" And I was like, "Yeah, cool." So it's the same sort of techniques, but it's it's like my bread and butter doing these sort of maps and stuff. So it's, even though they're not like a dungeon full of skulls and whatever and stuff, right? But they're sort of like the core concepts are the same. So it's actually fun. It's good doing. I did the ones recently for not for the Far East handbook because they're just like plain grass ones, but I did do the Jitra pint-sized campaign that's just come out. The maps in there, I did those ones.
So is the vast majority of the maps that you do then more sort of sci-fi fantasy based as opposed to historical?
Yeah, they're nearly all fantasy ones. I mean, I've done some maps. I did a map for Geek Villain recently of like a Normandy grass field kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I did some work for War Bases. They did some like, what were they, like ponds and fields, like MDF cut out pre-printed tiles and stuff, and they did a little dungeon set, and I did the textures for those things as well. So I have managed to do some, war game spillover things, but the bulk of the work I do is fantasy and sci-fi.
No, that's interesting to hear. And certainly we'll look out for your maps in future publications and in current ones. I'm sure people will be coming up to you and getting them signed at the Wargames. Yeah, I always think that they just have to be signatures so they can forge a check, but people don't use checks anymore. People don't use checks anymore. So I'm kind of safe now, I think, with that one, which is a good one. So I always finish off the first part of the show with the Venn diagram of wargaming, and that's just breaking down your hobby into 4 sections, and that's wargamer, painter, collector, and historian. Just to see, it's interesting for me and to the listeners as well, as where my various guests sit within that sort of diagram. So where would you see yourself with those categories?
So they were what? Wargaming?
Wargamer, painter, collector, historian.
Do you want like a percentage split?
No, well, however you want to do it. Some people, while you're thinking, I always say that, I'm mostly a painter and collector because I probably only game 10, 15 times a year. So whereas other people will game every single week, but not necessarily paint a lot of figures and collect. And then some people are really, really into the history, and some people just are into the game. So that's
are you putting terrain under painting?
Yeah, we can do.
Yeah. Okay. In that case, then I'm mainly. This is the hardest question. I guess mainly a painter.
Yeah.
As in a lot of terrain. I paint a lot of minis as well, but also kind of a collector because I'm kind of a completionist when I'm doing a project. I go, right, I'm doing this. I need every possible tank for this theatre. Yeah, so I would say, like, I feel like I'm labeling myself forever.
No, this is just for this particular moment.
Joe, I've heard you don't like history, eh? I think probably mainly like a painter wargamer. I don't. If I could play more often, I would.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not for the lack of wanting to play, but most of my hobby time is painting.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people can change how they view their hobby and how they do with their hobby based on things like the personal circumstances that we spoke about earlier on. And of course, everything changes over time. My last guest, Nick Jellicoe, we were talking about the Battle of Jutland, and there's a clash of characters between Beatty and Jellicoe. Beatty, the battle cruiser commander, and Jellicoe, the fleet commander. And when I was younger, I was all Team Beatty. I was all, charge, standing on the prow of my battle cruiser with my sword out. Let's contact the Germans. And now, as I approach my late 50s, I'm definitely Team Jellicoe. I'm definitely, look, lads, we've got a lot more ships here. We don't need to mess about. Let's just hang back and let the Germans make the mistake. So yeah, things change over time. I wouldn't worry about being labelled. Yeah, I've got lots of labels that people give me, but I don't worry about them.
Okay.
So we'll just take a break for the audience there, and we'll be back very shortly with our normal big game chat. Well, welcome back, everyone, and we're in part 2 of the podcast, which regular listeners will know when I'm not off on a tangent talking about history or paintbrushes or any of the other rubbish. When we're talking about proper wargaming, then this is the big game chat. And whatever my guest's history within wargaming or their chosen method of wargaming, I always like to stick a little bit in about my favourite area of the hobby. So the first question I go with everyone, Joe, is how do you see a big game? What is a big game for you?
Well, I've actually like become a real convert to big games. Because when after I went to the first Oozing Lard, the next year, Ali said to me, "Would you mind putting on a table?" And I was like, "Yeah, I will put on a table. I'll put on a Normandy table." And I thought, you know what would be really good is if I was to do a really big table, because I was torn between. I didn't want to waste any time in this. I slowly built it. I was torn in between because I was doing a Normandy table, and I was like, well, I'm really keen on doing Dead Man's Corner in Normandy, right? The Dead Man's Corner house, and I was like, that'd be a really good table, like fighting around that. I was like, but do you know what though? Like the actual fight is up the causeway up to the town of Saint Condamont. I was like, that'd be really good as well to do the town. That's like classic Band of Brothers, and they come into.
Yeah.
And I was like, I know what I'll do. I'll do like a 12-foot table. And I'll just do the whole thing. I'll do the road from Dead Man's Corner up to Saint Condamont, and it was brilliant. I loved it. It was a really good table. I took the same table to Salute the following year. Actually, I won best historical game with that table, right? And it was so like 14. I think it became 15 foot in the end. And what I liked about it was mainly the spectacle of this, this huge grand table. And the fact that you didn't feel as confined by a table edge as the battle spilled along the whole length of this road, and it allowed me to run a big game. I had 7 players at a time on this big table, and then from there, I just every time I do a show or do an event, I just do big tables now. So I've got I did a 15-foot Munda Point table in New Georgia, which I ran at some places. I've forgotten where I ran it, but I ran it at what's it called? BrickCon up in Nottingham at the Lard Workshop thing there and stuff. And then I've run a big 15-foot Germany 45 table and a big 15-foot Stalingrad table. So I think now my approach whenever I'm planning a new table is to plan it to be a 15-foot table. because I like the spectacle of it. I like the designing, like working out the best layout to sort of cover a large thick area.
No, it's interesting to hear, Joe, because a lot of the times, I'm one of these people who never says you can't. You always can at the end of the
Mm,
day, and a lot of people say I can't do big games, Ken, because I've got no space. And we've spoken earlier on about you living in a small terraced house and not having a lot of space.
yeah.
So, do you find the bigger game then? Are you are you thinking and expanding into that space that's available to you at a show?
Yeah, so there's when I'm testing these games, I can never test them at home in more than I'll test like, okay, what's the battle like at this half of the table or this end of the table,
Mm,
and I want to do big games. I like the challenge of making a big grand war games table, and going to shows and going to so I'm keen to do big tables because I like the spectacle. I like running into many people. I like the challenge of can I make this big table? Can I actually do this? And I use shows and lardy days and stuff
mm,
as the place to do them because you know I think as well people coming to those things appreciate the impact of a big table. They and I'm not doing it at home. I'm not making these tables at home. I'm not playing them at home because I haven't got the space for it. But I still get to go and enjoy,
mm,
having these big tables, but at shows.
mm. Do you think that your day job, the building the maps and a lot of that, fantasy world is coming from imagination? Do you think that that's your kind of mindset that you're able to imagine these larger tables and how they work in a virtual space in your head
Yeah,
virtually until
I'm
you put
quite.
them on a show?
I think I'm quite good at visually picturing things.
Mm.
And so like a lot of my like sort of daydreaming almost is, and my wife sort of laughs. It's a lot of my daydreaming is like planning how I would make something, right?
Yeah.
Or so I recently, what did I build? I built one of my Stalingrad factories. Was quite a complex one, and they were all scratch built, the Stalingrad factories, and one of them was quite complicated. And I spent a lot of my like sort of sitting, I'd be sort of sitting there with a cup of tea, sort of like looking into the
Mm.
distance. And what I was doing, my wife was sort of, "Are you thinking about buildings?" Like, yeah, I'm thinking about buildings. Um,
Ah.
I'd be sort of like planning how I would build a certain thing, how I can make that out of certain materials, um,
Mm.
and thing. And so then I guess there's quite a lot of overspill as well in terms of because of my job making these maps and things. I
Mm.
spend quite a lot of time looking at crap in the
Yeah.
streets, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
like, looking at like some rusty railing or something, or
Mm.
looking at drips down from a drain pipe, how that works on the wall and stuff. Because I then, I do that for my dungeon. So I sort of, okay, how do shadows interplay on these things, or how does stone weather when it's wet and that sort of stuff. And so I'm quite a visual person, and I'm quite a planning things in my head person. So when I got these big tables to do, I can picture how they're going to look
Yeah.
before I make them, and then
Yeah.
the magic of
Well,
haha.
yeah. Well, there's that famous meme, isn't there, where there's the couple lying in bed and the wife
Yeah,
sort of with her
yeah,
hands like that, going,
yeah,
"He's thinking about another woman,"
yeah,
and the guy's sort of crouched up, facing away from her, and
yeah,
then he's thinking about a
yeah,
car or
yeah,
how
yeah,
he's
yeah.
going to do some trees on a Burma table or something along
Do you
those
know what,
lines.
the other day I was in the car with my youngest. She's 8, right? And we were in traffic, and I was looking out the window at this thing, and she said to me, she went, "Are you looking at that rusty wall?" Right? And I was like, "Yes." Yes, I am sure. I knew it. I knew you were looking because it had a really good rust pattern, right? And I was thinking, I like that. I like the colours on that. I can see how
Yeah.
that how would I paint that sort of thing. And she realised that when I'm sort of like looking at something with that sort of look, that I'm probably planning some sort of war game thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think that? I mean, obviously, from a sort of hobby perspective, the larger games have kind of gone out of fashion. Only this week we've had another set of skirmish game rules for
Mm.
for World War II coming out. Do you think that the big games can come back into fashion? What do you think that we need to do to get to that point?
Well, I think so. I think so. I mean, I know that there's a lot of smaller games, and a lot of the tables at the shows are, little like 3 foot games sort of thing. I guess people can't necessarily do big games at home,
Yeah.
but if people can see that you can attend the shows, you can play the big games at the shows, you can also then replicate bits of that at home in smaller scale things. I mean, I all my big games are really modular tables. So all of them are made from, nothing is fixed to a big board. I don't do like big sculpted huge boards that can't go anywhere, that have to be one setup and things. And so actually all of my big tables can actually be played in smaller versions. You could just not put as many factories.
Yeah.
And so maybe people seeing that the larger games actually can be quite flexible. Also, then just enjoying the big games, enjoying the fact that there are big games at shows. And I guess the smaller games are possibly coming from the fact that a lot of manufacturers are tapping into the fact that they want to access the market of younger people who might be living in a smaller flat and haven't got the time or the commitment to make a big table. So that's a sort of financial. I know a lot of the sort of Games Workshop games recently have been designed as small skirmish things, right? So
yeah, it's an interesting one, and from I've talked about this to a couple of people who have their own companies about that. The volume of finance and advertising that goes into drawing somebody into a game. That if you get somebody in and it's 10 figures or 20 figures and a set of rules, that's your buy-in and that's it. Whereas if you could drag somebody into 28mm Napoleonics, you're effectively making them homeless and and hungry for the rest of their lives because they're going to spend so much money on it. So I don't quite get the economic model of it, but that's just me. But that's interesting to talk about sometimes. So we'll move on and we'll just have a quick chat now about Hearts of Lard. So we've although the Lard games tend to be, they're not always, but tend to be more of a skirmish type thing. I'm a big fan of their philosophy and rule techniques. So I'm always keen to talk about those sort of things. And they have things called Lard days where they're not sales things for the lardies. They're just groups of guys getting together, guys and girls getting together for a good old game and a curry and a pint afterwards. So Hearts of Lard, then is that your fault?
That's my one. Yeah, I think it's a good name though, right? It's a good name, all right. I quite like it.
I think some of them, and I did put Nick Skinner on the spot when I interviewed him, which was his favourite. But I think the names for the Lard days are superb. They're absolutely brilliant. So there
was like I had the weight of history on my shoulders, having to decide a good name, right, for this. So Hearts of Lard, we had the second one in March. So I started it 2 years ago, and the sort of like the reason was I had been to some Lard days. I had been to Winter Wonderlard down in Bristol.
Yeah.
And I've been to Oozing Lard, and I've been to I really enjoyed them, and I was like, I want to go to more, but they always clashed. All the sort of dates clash with family things, or like schooly things or whatever.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, looking at our family timetable, March is an empty month for us. I'm quite free to do stuff. So I was like, I'm just gonna go for it. I'm gonna set up my own lard day. And so I was looking for venues, and the last school I taught at, Rickmansworth School in Hertfordshire, I knew them really well. The staff were really nice, and they had a massive hall, a really, really big school hall, and loads of parking outside. I was like, that's great, that's down the road. So I got them in touch, and I booked the hall and everything, and I said, right, I'm just going to go for it. And I was floored by the response. I had like, within the first week, I had 15 people offering to run games.
Wow.
I was like, this is brilliant, right? And then we had, I think we had about 65 people at the first one last year. It was packed, right? It was brilliant.
Yeah.
But the thing is, the hall is so massive, and they got like endless tables, being a school, right? There was massive, huge games, brilliant games everywhere. Big 10-foot games going on. I think half the tables were 6 foot by 8 or larger, and yeah, it was brilliant, and had a great time. People spoke very highly of the day. They really enjoyed the day and the games. I was so pleased it hadn't flopped, as the first one, right? And afterwards, people were saying to me straight away, when's the next one? When's the next one? So I was like, that's great. So I contacted the school and got that booked as well for the second one straight away. And so we just had that back in March, Hearts of Lard 2. We even have polo shirts now. That's how permanent we are now. We have official polo shirts, and yeah, it was great. We had 80 people at Hearts of Lard 2, and like 14 tables or so. Yeah, it's really fun. It's a really fun event. It's quite a lot of organising, because you have to first, sort of get general interest, and you have to go, right, who can run a table and how many players can you host? You go, right, I've got this many player spaces, and then you try and fill those, and then one of the hosts can't make it for some reason. You're like, oh no, that's a gap now. And then someone doesn't turn up to play, and you're like, oh no, that's a gap this way, and whatever. And then the sort of like herding cats aspect of, oh, could you send your money for the venue? Oh, you haven't paid. Oh, could you? But actually, it's not that bad, and the overall event is worth it, because it's a really good day, right? And I think we had at Hearts of Lard about 20 people. It was their first ever Lard Day event, right? And they had never played. Some had only just got into wargaming, so there was quite a good element of like, come and learn the thing. And what's nice about the Lard Days is they are entirely non-competitive. There's no aspect of any sort of competition, even within the game, even like just in the mentality of people's playing. Like, let's just have a good game. Let's just play a good game together, right? And if you lose, wow, that's a good story. Look how I lost. It was fun how I lost, right? But also, because you're not having to bring anything, if you're there as a player, you just turn up as a player, right? You haven't got to bring dice or minis or rule books or learn the rules first, or you just turn up, and the hosts provide everything for you. And it's a great way for people to like try a new rule set, try a new theatre, try a new game, whatever. And it's a really friendly, welcoming environment. Like it's
I've been involved sort of on the outskirts, just putting games on at Steel Lard for 3 or 4 years now, and I have to say I really enjoy it, and I think the Lard community, and as I said earlier on, I don't always play Lard games because it's a small scale and I'm normally used to, but I love the way that there isn't that competitive element, that it's more of a fun and laugh and a joke day, whilst playing a really, really good game. Is that something that just overall for the Lard thing, you're involved in that, and you've done Lard zones and stuff at shows, is that one of the things that draws you to that section of the hobby?
I think so. I think that because very early on in my wargaming sort of career, very short career so far, but that's a bit grand. But I very quickly I became involved in Lard things, and I'm not a competitive game. I didn't like the fact, actually, with Bolt Action, there was all the sort of community online there had a competitive edge
Yeah.
that I sort of saw about like points listing, like points and maximizing spend on flamethrowers and stuff.
Yeah.
Right, I didn't love that sort of aspect of it, and all the events that I saw advertised for Bot Action were competitive game events. They were win a trophy by wasn't keen on that. So so very early on, I was then talking to large players online or going to games events and stuff, and I think that helped me stay in the hobby. Quite early on, I was like, well, actually, this is good, and these people are nice people, and the environment is just about having a fun game. Like, I mean, obviously, there's exceptions. Like, you'll something in the past, some event I went to, and someone there was overly precious about losing, and that was but yeah, they were losing the game, and they just got really sulky the more they lost, right?
Yeah.
And that was an exception. I was like surprised when I encountered that, because that's not like everyone I've played against and everyone I've seen at large events and whatever stuff. That's not been the case. People have enjoyed losing. If you're losing and you're like, oh, I know the mistakes I made, or it's a funny situation when you're trying to cross the street and everyone gets gunned down. You're like, well, it's funny in game terms. I mean, like in real life, right? That's not funny. Yeah. So there's a really good. I think the attitude is.
It's a different vibe. When I first started, there was always a group who in our club who would play like Ancients gaming that was kind of based around a competition type set of rules, and it would be like watching two chess grandmasters play each other. There'd be a lot of beard scratching and a lot of puffing on pipes, and I'm sure those guys really enjoy that side of gaming. And I'm not getting at them at all. But that didn't appeal to me. And then we would be at our table and we'd be laughing and joking and just enjoying and ribbing each other when we had a crap die roll or whatever. And that style of wargaming always appealed to me, and that seems to be where the lards come from as well. So it's really nice to see that, and it brings different people into the hobby who can enjoy it and enjoy the history behind it as well. So thanks very much for that little big game chat there, and we're going to move on to our world famous quiz. Okay, we are back in the room, and it's the infamous, I don't know, whichever side of the bread you butter is on. It's the Yorkshire Gamer quiz, and as always, we for the delicate of mind out there, we have to say that this is a laugh and a joke, and we're not being serious about this, and we don't mean to upset anybody, apart from people who use round dice. They can hook off. Right, so you've heard this before. I think it's it's either yes or no, or one or the other. And the general, well, I'm not saying generally. There is a massive regional bias in this, and I do have to say that you are the first person to try. You might recognise it when it comes out, but there's a new question. One of the questions has been retired, and I've put a new question. Not especially for you, Joe. You just happen to be the first.
I'm not special.
Person.
I'm just the first. Okay.
Yeah, you're just the first. So, are you ready to go, mate?
I am ready.
Okay, so question one: go big or go home?
Go big.
Go big. Good lad. Question two: contrast paints, are they great or are they a gimmick?
They're a gimmick. I never use them.
Good lad. Are you doing well so far?
Do I get a score at the end? Yeah.
You get a score at the end, and to be honest, some people will think a really low score is good, and some people think a really high score is good. So I wouldn't worry about what you actually end up with. It's a bit like that music show, Never Mind the Buzzcocks.
Yeah.
Where the score and have I got news for you? Where the score is actually completely unrelated to the
Yeah.
questions. Question 3: paintbrushes. Would you go for really expensive Southern Windsor and Newton, or Yorkshire made Pro Art?
I would go for cheap crap because
Cheap crap.
I paint on. I'm like, they get wrecked. My paintbrushes get wrecked on terrain.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Actually, very good point. So you're from the Sean Clark, who's a regular on the Brews in the Binyard.
Yeah,
He uses what's called rat hair
yeah,
brushes because he just like
yeah.
£2 for
Most
six.
a lot of my paintbrushes are like 2-inch emulsion brushes, right? So
That's good to hear. So 96 figures. Is that an army or a unit of pike?
that's a unit.
Good lad. Good lad. 6x4, is that a table? Is that a big game or a small game?
That's a small game.
Small game. Oh, doing very well. Doing very well. Question 7. Back to painting again. And wet palette or an old bit of MDF to mix your paints?
Old MDF.
You see, wet palettes are going out of fashion.
Yeah, they have drops out there, haven't they? Yeah.
Yeah. And somebody, unfortunately, I didn't get a photograph of it, but somebody told me that somebody at Partisan was selling wet pallets at half price.
Yeah, please buy my wet pallets. Yeah,
That
no, I just use
tells you something.
any old bits of cardboard, MDF. My like chopping board is, you can't see the color of it because it's cutting board's just entirely covered in paint.
Oh yeah, it's a sign of the times, and I'm glad to say that I started it, and I am eradicating wet pallets from the world. I don't know if it's going to save the planet, but
Yeah.
I'm just saying I've made my contribution. Question 8: when you're undercoating figures, do you go black or white?
Well, I actually don't do either of those. I go
Oh,
for like a mid khaki.
okay, yeah. No,
Like sort of,
that's an interesting one, I have to say. Yeah, I mean, some people do. Obviously, with World War Two, that's not a bad
yeah,
base, is it?
yeah.
Because
Often that's the base color for most
yeah,
of the uniforms are,
yeah.
khaki greys or khakis or khaki browns. So
So, with you doing mostly World War Two, do you have any bright colours anywhere? Have you got any blues or reds or yellows, or is
not
it just all
only for like
grey and
a Frenchman's trousers, like
yeah?
uh, or like a little bit of a hat. But generally, no. I've got like 60 shades of green and
Yeah.
a lot of browns and greys. Yeah, not much brightness.
I have to say, I mean, I paint a lot of historical stuff that's really bright and colourful, and especially Italian wars.
Mm.
And then when I come to do my World War Two ships, I have got like loads of different colours of grey.
Yeah,
A little bit. There's some of the British ships had like a light green or a light blue colour on some of the dazzle camouflage,
yeah,
but it's extremely dull
yes,
collection of
yeah,
paints.
yeah.
So, yeah, I can see where you're coming from. Question 9: Yorkshire tea or dirty mucky coffee?
Tea, never coffee.
Tea.
Coffee is my kryptonite. The smell of coffee makes me vomit. So
Oh, well, that's all right then. That's well done. And question 10: War Games unit. This might be difficult for you because you're a World War Two lad. War game units. Do you like them tightly packed or socially distanced?
I think it depends on the tactical situation.
Oh, very good, very good.
Yeah.
I'll give you.
If there's mortars coming down, then spaced out nicely.
Yeah, I'll give you half a point for that.
All right, thanks.
I'll be generous.
That's good.
Question 11: do you want a 2-hour club game or a weekend monster game?
I think a weekend monster game would be good.
Excellent. That's what we like to hear. Now you are Watford, I think you said.
Yep.
So you are south of the avocado line. But do you like avocados, or do you think they are just posh mushy peas?
I do like avocado.
You do.
I do.
Oh,
Oh, -10. Yeah.
can you hear the points falling to the
I
floor?
can see your face drop. Right. I thought you were doing all right, mate. I'm now going to end this podcast.
Oh dear. Question 13, the universal question, Joe. So no pressure on you here.
Yep.
58 episodes, everyone's answered the same. Round dice, are they allowed or banned on your table?
I don't even know what you'd use round dice for. So.
Exactly. Yeah, I think I'm slowly ridding the world of them. Nobody's come up with a good idea yet, apart from maybe firing out as canister. A
Yeah.
reenactment show or something like that. That would be a great. That
You
would
go
be a
to
great
go
way.
to A&E with like lots of dice embedded in your face.
Yeah, and you see, the sad thing is that you would go and you would be in severe pain and potential death even, and you've got all
Yep.
these bits of round dice in you, and none of them are going to show a number.
No, but what number is that? I'm not quite sure.
Somewhere between 2 and 6. I can't quite work out what it is. So yes, that's good to see that one has gone. So drum roll. New question. The fish and chip question has been retired. Thank you very much,
Okay.
David Marshall, for that question that's lasted for a couple of years now. But this one came to me in a recent flash of inspiration. The Lord Jesus came down and was at the end of my bed and said, "You need to get rid of the fish and chip question, lad, and bring this one in." So, War Games rules. Do you like glorious imperial measurements, i.e., inches, or French money, i.e., centimeters?
I like inches.
Glorious imperial measurements. Well done. Thank you, Joe, for answering that question correctly the first time it's come out. Question 15. Do you love a good table in a set of rules, like a casualty table or armor penetration, or do you prefer everything dice based?
I like a decent table.
Yeah, that's good to hear.
Yeah.
That's good to hear. I
Yeah.
like a table. There's lots you can do with a table, summarising
There
and
is.
stuff like that.
Yeah.
Question 16. 28 mil is king. Yes or no?
Yes. King. Yes.
Of course it is. Do they even make figures in other scales? That's what I'm saying.
They're just undersized 28 mil, really, aren't they? Like.
Yeah. I mean, there aren't 9,000 Napoleonics in there at 15 mil, but yeah, don't worry about it. I'm hiding it. So 17. Unpainted miniatures allowed on the table? Yes or no?
No.
No.
Just paint the minis or don't play with those minis.
Yeah, standards. Question 18. Are you a football man or not interested at all?
I'm not really interested.
Not really. Right. This is a Bradford City top. Okay. Bradford City or Leeds United?
Well, I feel a bias in the interviewer here. I'm actually gonna say Leeds because
Dirty Leeds.
my dad supported Leeds when he was younger, so I'll go for that connection.
Dirty Leeds. Come on, Southampton. That's all I'm saying. Come on. So, question 19. Yorkshire or the other place over the hill?
I'll go with Yorkshire. I like
Lad.
Yorkshire more for visiting places.
Yeah. They've just got like poverty and
Yeah.
and factories.
That's it.
And
Factory, yeah.
Witches, Pendle witches.
Yep.
What do I
witches.
do I need to say anymore? So we are on the final question. I'll be interested to see where you go with this one. So Games Workshop, are they the work of the devil? Yes or no?
No. Well, like I say no because they're providing a nice thing for a lot of people, but then they also a lot of their fans are like
Yeah, there is that element.
The sort of like the hardcore ones who are I'll say no. I say yes.
Yes, good lad. Right. Well, it's because this like they have these big like flame wars, don't they? And I think the latest was about Lady Space Marines or something like that. And
it draws out all these arseholes, and stuff. And they make crazy profits, but I don't know. It's hard because obviously people do enjoy their games and whatever, but
I have confessed on the program before that I do own one Games Workshop share. So Crazy Profits is good for me.
It's good for you.
Yeah, no, it's not going to let me retire early, but I don't mind the odd £1.20 dividend every now and again.
That's good, yeah.
Keep it coming. Keep it coming. So 82.5%. Very, very respectable, Joe. Thank you very much for that. And good to see that a newer member to the hobby follows the Yorkshire Gamer way, which is what we like to see and hear. So we're now going to move on to Wargames Room 101, and that's a feature that's been in the programme for some time now. And it just gives my guests an opportunity to kind of put something forward that's a personal hatred in the hobby. And, we're not having a go at anyone here. I've gone on about my hatred of 12-figure cavalry regiments over many recent episodes. And there was a load at Partisan on Saturday, so obviously I'm in a minority there, but is there something, Joe? This is what we call safe space. Obviously, there's only 3,000 or 4,000 people listening, so they're not going to hold it against you. What's the thing in the hobby that drives you mad?
It's bases on tanks.
Oh yes, this is going to start a flame war.
I know. I was like, well, what do I actually? What I don't really have many things that bother me, right? But do you know what? That's one that definitely.
We'll go into that answer in your answer in a second. But something you just said there. What you didn't think there's much things that bother you, and then when I was putting this show together originally and doing the Wargames Room 101, I asked myself that question, and I had a list of about 40 things, and I got myself quite frightened at the end by going, "Oh, bloody! Why am I in this hobby?" They're all just personal things. Really, and Simon Miller brought this up, bless him. Really big, thick Sabo bases that make a 28mm figure 40mm. It just drives me mad. Anyway, sorry. Back to you, Joe. Bases on tanks. What is it about bases on tanks that drive you mad?
Well, I think the main thing is that they don't need bases, right? So, I mean, really, bases exist on any mini just for balance reasons, right? Yeah. That's the only reason they exist. And so I do on my soldiers as small and inconspicuous base as I can, because when I'm putting a guy, in an urban setting, and then he goes into the forests or whatever, right? Why you're not going to carry some bricks with him, right? When I had like a base and there's got like a little wall on the base, right? Yeah. It's like what? So with tanks, which require no support on standing up, these the tanks are perfectly able to, especially if you're doing little 6mm tanks, sure, right? You might want to put one on a base. I'll allow that, but 15mm upwards, where the tanks are fully stable, big base things, they don't need to be on a bit of MDF, right? For a start, right? It also makes them then too big, right? The tanks become too big. Yeah. Plus, they drag whatever setting along with them, right? So, you put your tank in like the urban ruins, but it's got a bush and some muddy tracks with it and stuff. So don't need that, right? You don't want that. I think, in fact, I also want to add into my bases on tanks, but also on like big artillery pieces as well. Like you want to put like a field gun, pushing like a little diorama of it, like poking through a fence. But you can't do that if it's got some big base around it. But I'll allow that a little bit because sometimes the guns are a bit delicate and you might snap bits off, right? But tanks, no need for bases at all.
I have to say that in all my 40 plus years of wargaming now, I have never ever had a tank fall over.
Exactly.
Even a KV2 with that ginormous
with a big box on top. Yeah.
Even I've never had one of those fall sideways off a hill.
No, it doesn't need it, right? It doesn't need it, and it just it spoils the visuals of a tank going around to be dragging with it this thing. But you don't need if you can bases are only needed to stop things falling over. That's why they exist. That's why you have a base. And tanks do not fall over, and therefore tanks don't need a base.
I always say because it always flames up on Twitter whenever we talk
Yeah,
about
it does.
this. And
someone will post it, and someone will say, good to see a base on the tank, right? And then there'll be like a thread of going, I hate bases on tanks, and others going, yes, it's the right thing to do, bases on tanks,
Yeah.
So I'm ready for the backlash.
Excellent. Because I always post up a picture of a T-34 on a plinth. And just say that the reason the Russians were so badly defeated in 1941 is because they based the tanks and they couldn't move, and that after 1942 they removed the bases and discovered freedom of movement and therefore beat the Nazis. So I'll leave it there.
Yeah.
So basing of tanks, definitely. I can hear the vault door closing behind me, and that is one of my pet hates as well. And especially that, like you say, that inability of the vehicle to then fit into more than one terrain area.
Yeah,
especially if
you've done like a winter tank or a winter base.
Yeah,
and then you're like, I'm also driving around down this field. It's like, this is stupid now.
Or a desert base or something like that.
It doesn't need it.
No, excellent. That's what I like to hear. So finally, in this section, we're just going to talk. We're going to do the Desert Island War game, which is similar to Desert Island Discs on Radio 4, and that's, you imagine you've been locked away or sent away on a desert island or stranded, and you get a copy of Shakespeare, the Bible, and you can take 3 things with you. And the first one is a war game, and that could be anything. I've had people do computer games in the past and board games or whatever, but a war game that means something to you that you would like to take with you.
I think I'd take Hero Quest, actually.
Yeah. Wow.
It's just because it's a. I played that when I was 10 years old, and it got me into even the concept of minis as a thing and stuff, right? And I presume I'm on my own on this island, right?
Yeah.
And so it's actually you can essentially play it on your own, because it's got like the mechanism of where the monsters are is in the book as a pre-designed thing, right? So I'd be able to play it on my own as I'm starving to death.
Yes.
But I have good memories as I perish.
Yeah, that's true. It's a shame they didn't bring a version out where the figures were actually high grade protein or something like that.
I know. Although that would last me for. Then I'd be like, well, now I'm hungry and I've got no game.
So, what would be the number one book for you to take?
I think obviously this also relies on me having some things to paint.
Yeah.
But my go-to hobby book is it's called Modelling and Painting German World War II Infantry, I think it's called, or figures, by Michael Farnworth. And it's essentially it's got painting guides for every single type of German troop. And all the camo patterns and stuff. So I paint. If you do World War II, you paint a lot of Germans, right?
Yeah.
And so it's my go-to book for that. Obviously, that. Well, if I was on this island, I just look and go, I remember when I used to have minis to paint, and now I'm doomed. But look at the good things I could have painted. Yeah. It's a good book,
So is that book designed primarily for modelers? Then is it?
Yeah. It's I think he's the guy that does on the Artisan webpage, Artisan Miniatures webpage. There's like some PDFs of like painting guides that he wrote. I think it's him, like 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And then he obviously put it together as a book. So it's designed for 28mm essentially. And using Vallejo paint guides, sort of thing.
Oh, brilliant! Excellent.
And it goes through the gear, what the items are on the Germans' equipment, backpack stuff, and what colours those are, and then all the different uniforms, Kriegsmarine and early war, and splinter camo, and then patterns and colour schemes and paint recipes. So it's a really good book. I use it all the time whenever I'm painting Germans. especially a new type of German.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, it's excellent. I'll keep an eye out for that. I mean, I think one of the big changes in the hobby over my time in it is the availability of information.
Mm.
You know, a lot of time you'd be getting and learning techniques from people who um, would, you know, be artists or something like that, and then you might get um, you know, a whisper, you know, have you tried this? Have you tried, you know, but banana oil was this thing. You used to put banana oil on old plastic figures, and it would make them
Right.
supple so that they wouldn't break in the future. Or at least that's what I was told. But
They're going, that idiot's covered his fingers in banana oil. He's so gullible.
yeah, there's somebody laughing somewhere now. But yeah, so now it's so much easier to, and you know, with the likes of
Mm.
YouTube and what have you, to learn these techniques and from
Yeah.
other people. So that's a big advance in the hobby. It can be quite confusing for some, you know, sometimes because people will
Yeah.
watch three people. You know, if you watch three people paint a figure, you'll get three different ways of painting that figure. So it can be quite
Mm.
confusing if people are trying to find a definitive way of doing things straight off the bat.
Yeah.
But obviously, that's a good thing. So the final thing to Wargames Room 101 is a Wargames unit. So is there anything that's yours that you particularly would like to take, or something that belongs to somebody else that you covet and would love to have in your collection?
I really like my 101st Airborne platoon.
Yeah.
That was the first time um, I approached making the platoon with the intention of, right, I'm going to do a complete thing. Right, I'm going to go out and purposely buy the minis for this platoon. Here's the setup for it. Here's the support things, and I even bothered. I don't really bother so much now, but I even bothered putting decals on their shoulders
Wow.
and, you know, on their helmets and
Yeah.
stuff. Right, I don't bother now. I was like, you know, it's fine,
Yeah.
right?
Done that.
But they're so distinctive, you know, Easy Company sort of classic stuff. So I think then they still look decent. You know, even though they're quite an early bunch of my painted minis, but they look good. And they were the first ones that I did as a full structured platoon, as opposed to ad hoc collection of, oh, I'll get a bit of this and slowly build things. It was like, I'm going to make this platoon and do that.
Yeah, that's an excellent choice. Thank you very much for that. So we'll move on now to the big topic, and let's go all American and let's talk terrain. Okay, it's the final section of the show, and I'm not saying that that Joe is the evangelist of terrain, but he's going to try and persuade us to do a little bit more with our terrain over the next few minutes or so. And you know, before we start this, I'll do my little confession first, and I have always struggled with terrain, and you know, I've kind of always been the one that's gone, oh, I could have been painting some figures, and you know, but it does, as I mentioned in the introduction, make a huge difference to a table or whatever, and it involves quite a lot of techniques what we're going to talk about and modelling and stuff like that. So, what was the thing? You know, we talked a little bit around it at the start, but what was the thing that drew you into not just solely doing terrain, because obviously we talked about your gaming and your figures and stuff like that. But what was the thing that drew you in to think, I want to make this terrain look special?
I think it was because I had one of my early games. I had painted up, you know, tanks and everything. I enjoyed painting the tanks. They looked really good, and the soldiers looked really good. And then I put them on the table, and I had made a little bit of basic terrain stuff, and I was just sort of like enjoying the ground level eye view of these little scenes, right? And I was like, this is really quite cinematic, and you know, this, I thought, this is what elevates wargaming, elevates from, you know, like a board game, in that you know, it's a visual thing, right? You know, like, there's a lot of time put into sculpting, or, you know, perfect minis, right? Amazing minis with action, you know, like appearances, and their uniforms accurate, and their faces look great, and they're really cool, and the vehicles look great, and you paint them all up nicely. So you've put in that time into making those things more than just cardboard blocks, right? Because you could legitimately play any war game, but it's replacing all the minis with a bit of cardboard just saying name of the unit, right? But we don't do that. We paint the minis nicely, and we care about those things. And then when I sort of put them on the table with the terrain, I was like, well, I want the terrain to tell as much story and to add as much to the game as this, and actually to elevate even more, like to really tie the whole thing together and say this is the place. And when you're playing it, you feel like you're in this location. This actual place feels like the place, and not just a generic flat board with the minis on it. So I essentially then at that point decided I was going to push myself to work on terrain to make sure my tables look nice as possible, and I just started making stuff, and I just began.
So, did you have any sort of pre-building terrain skills that were useful, and how did you then develop those skills to where you are today with making terrain? How have you learned?
Yeah, I didn't directly have. Like I said earlier, I look at things a lot, right? So I was really interested in how materials weather and the artistic side of those things, but I hadn't really made a lot of things. I think it's mainly a practice. I guess it's a practice thing, but it's also recognizing what actually matters when you're making terrain is the feel of the terrain more than caring about little tiny details, right? So as in like if you look at my terrain close up, like it's quite messy, right? In a sort of good way, right? In that when I paint things, I use big brushes to paint things. It's almost like I'm going to compare myself to an impressionist painter, right?
Yeah, no, that's exactly what was going through my mind. So no,
yeah. So when you look close up at an impressionist painting, it's these little apparently messy brush marks, right? Little lots of color and stuff. But when you come out from a distance, you see the whole thing, but you also get the feel of what it's like, right? You sort of, I sort of say that when you look at the world in real life and you're out looking at things, you're not looking close up at a brick wall, like right at detail and going, what exact color is this? You're looking at a distance and you're going, what is it about the wall that makes you recognize it as a wall? Or it's this sort of color palette, this sort of texture. It's this is how it feels. This is how the wall feels to me. This is and so what I try and get across with my terrain stuff is the feel of the buildings, the feel of the landscapes, the feel of the color palettes, the textures. I want the wall to feel like a wall as opposed to caring about painting individual bricks. Because you don't see, when you're out and about, you don't look at individual bricks. You're looking at the wall and you're seeing the mottled colors. So, when I paint walls and things, I never paint separate bricks. I sort of splodge on appropriate colors and things, and that gives the impression of that. But I also think it's really important that color palettes are correct and also consistent across the whole table. That you work out what colors you want to go for, and then you mute them down, you sort of desaturate them slightly, and then you stick with that as you work across it.
So when you are putting these things together, are you looking at historical photographs of the areas that you're trying to create? Are you looking at the buildings today to get colours and that sort of thing? Is there a level of research involved?
There is, yeah. So often I've done tables that are based on real locations. So my Saint Comte de Mont one and Dead Man's Corner was based entirely on real aerial photographs and real street views. And I even actually managed I contacted for Dead Man's Corner. I contacted the museum and the guy that runs it now, I think he's the grandson of the original owners or something. And so, because the Dead Man's Corner now has got this big like cinema that they've built on the back of it, and like a big museum to etc. And I contacted them, and they actually sent me photographs of the building before they built those things. So from the back of the building, because on Street View, on Google Street View, you can't see the back of the building anymore. Anyway, it's all covered with this thing. So I did a lot of research with those things. I spend a lot of time looking at photographs of the actual buildings, the actual locations. Yeah, so like then I'm replicating those, but also I like traveling in France quite a lot. We go to France quite a lot, and I'm always looking at the buildings, and getting a feel for the sort of color. Obviously, color's a funny thing anyway, right? Color of any building massively depends on lighting, right? All the time. The same building looks so different at different times of day. But what I try and get across is the way that you feel it should look, and which colours actually feel right for the building. So that's quite a waffly answer, really. But
that's a good answer. That's a good, because as I said before, I'm not particularly overly skilled at terrain, but I do try when I have to. If I've got to do something, I will do. But when for painting, it's very much the same. I think that a good painter can do the similar effect with 2 hours of wet blending, but a painter who works in a different way, like an impressionist or whatever, can put a not a dollop, but a line of a certain colour in a certain place that will bring out a highlight or accentuate a shadow or something along those lines. And it's purely just putting the right colour in the right place with the right size of brush stroke. So I know exactly where you're coming from.
3 painters that are particularly good at that I see on Twitter. Jasper, Jasper, right?
Yeah.
And Welsh Jeff, and John Savage, right? Yeah. They all paint with quite an impressionist style. Like they're not like doing careful wet blending. They're sort of lots of colour, but they're brilliant. The detail, and they make the characters really pop. They are like fantastic miniatures painters, and they had that sort of style.
I think there's room for lots of style, and one of the things that I come across with painters coming from Warhammer 40k into historicals and asking me for advice is this almost religious adherence to detail and wet blending and all and that's great if you're going for a golden demon, but if you're painting big Wargames units, you'll go blind and mad before you get anywhere near a 96 figure paint block.
So I often at the games I'm running, I'm sort of providing platoons for 6 players, right? So I'll do, like for example, my Munda Point game had 3 Japanese platoons, and each platoon was about 80 or 90 blokes, which is big for World War II skirmish games. That's big. And so my mini painting is essentially the same sort of idea as my terrain painting. I do my base coats, I put on a wash, I highlight in the original base color just to tidy up bits where the wash has darkened it.
Yeah,
that's it. Like it's enough. They look fine, and I'm not stressed about tiny details.
So when you're doing this research, etc., you're obviously going to get highly detailed photographs, plans, maybe for some of the sort of things. How much do you take into account the fact that these are going to be wargaming pieces and that people are going to touch them and they're going to go to shows, etc., to determine the level of detail that you put on the models?
Yeah, and that's a really important point because also for my storage thing, they get stored in in big boxes.
Yeah.
They don't go on shelves. They're all sort of like chucked into a box, carefully chucked, like slow motion chucking. But they're not,
Placed.
yeah, that's the word. Slow motion chucking or placing. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, well, one thing that makes them really durable is I cover everything with polyfiller.
Yeah.
I like literally anything I build has got a layer of polyfiller over it, and so that adds a level of durability. But also, like, I don't details that are going to snap off. I omit, sort of thing, because they're not really super important. I mean, what's lucky is often the things I've built, it's like Normandy farmhouses and stuff. They are simple, blocky buildings.
Yeah.
That lend themselves to being quite durable anyway, because they're just boxy rectangles and stuff. I use so Paul Edwards at Sabotage 3D.
Yeah.
He is a brilliant guy, as I'm sure everyone listening knows, because everyone orders stuff from him all the time, right? But he's like my go for like little details, little small detail things. He's my go-to, and so I'll WhatsApp him and say, "Oh, are you busy, Paul?" All right, and he'll normally say, "Oh, fuck off." No, what's this now, right? And so I'll go, right, here's my list of things, right? And so things like windows, with delicate window frames, and those sort of little fiddly bits that he prints those off for me, but he does them in resin, and that's really durable resin anyway. I think also, I mean, this is particularly an important point when I did my recent Stalingrad stuff, was most of the buildings were ruins, and so what I do with my rubble things is I put a small amount of fixed rubble onto the buildings, because too much, you can't stand minis on the Mator, right? And then the bulk of my stuff is loose scatter terrain, loose big bucket of rubble I scatter on the actual table. And so particularly in those situations, the decision is that it might look better as a model itself if all this rubble was fixed in place on the thing, but that's not a gaming piece. You can't stand minis on those things. So I do the compromise. So I do a little bit around the corners and the edges where you won't stand minis, but the bulk of it then comes separately, come loose.
Yeah, and we'll talk a little bit about the actual process of making things shortly. But the techniques that you use, do you experiment with different things? Do you watch YouTube videos, read books? How do you go about finding different ways of doing things?
I do a lot of experimentation with things.
Yeah.
When I'm at B&Q, I've often got my eye out for different materials that can. A really good source of inspiration actually is the model railway community, right? So they've been making models since year dot, right? They have a lot of interesting things that you can. I mean, like, obviously they're making things for different use. Then they're not making durable things that are going to get played. They're like setups, right? So not all of it's transferable, but some of it is. Some of it you can go, well, look, I can take that idea and I can substitute this material, or I can change this, but the idea behind it is a good idea, and I'll make it more durable to actually work for wargaming. But I think just mess around and play with things. Like try new materials, try different approaches for things. At worst, you chuck away some polystyrene, right? If it's a mess up. But I started my original terrain pieces were MDF kits that I would cut up with polyfiller and stuff. So I build a kit and then I skin it with polyfiller. And then as I got more confident with making stuff, I started to then make the buildings from scratch using either Foamex or polystyrene. But if you mess that up, it's no big deal. You just chuck it away and try again. But it actually has meant that there's a few techniques that I use that I really think add stuff to the buildings that just came from experimentation, really.
Yeah. Oh, excellent. So let's take a building then. Let's think I come to you and I go, "Oh, Joe, I need this building from this location at this time." How would you start from that point, and what's the process for actually making that model?
Okay, I'll give you a real example. Let's say you wanted me to make the church at Saint Condemont,
Yeah.
right? Which is what I did with that one was I went on Google Maps and I found the aerial view of the church. So unfortunately, it's slightly skewed. The angle is slightly skewed. It's not purely top down. So I got a sort of overall view, and I found a website that had a plan of the church.
Oh wow.
And then I worked out the scale, and it was going to be a joke. It would be the whole table almost. Right?
Yeah.
So I was like, well, I don't need that. I want to show the church and have the church be imposing, but I'm not just wargaming in the church. So I worked out a decent scaling of the church so that it would be impressive and look like a church that was bigger than the houses, but wouldn't be this ridiculous thing. And then I drew it in Photoshop as the floor plan to scale, and it's about the church is behind me. Can you see up on that?
Oh yeah, in the corner
there, right?
Yeah.
So it's about. You can't. The podcast isn't a video. Anyway, it's about 1.5 2 foot long, so I printed that off onto paper and I stuck that down onto a sheet of Foamex, which is essentially extruded polyvinyl chloride. Cut that out, and then I then went to Google Earth again, and I got street views of the building, and then also found historical photographs of the building, and I saw how big soldiers and vehicles were next to the church. And so then in Photoshop again, I got the side view of the church, and I scaled it to work for minis, right? So, okay, this is how big this should be. And then I had a set of measurements, and I cut it out of Foamex. Then I contacted Paul, and I said, right, Paul, I need some windows doing. And I then gave him this like PDF of about 8 different window designs of different sizes. I need one of these, 6 of these, one of that, a model of Jesus, like all these little bits, right?
Yeah.
And so then he happily, without any swearing, happily went off and started doing those. And then I built the church out of Foamex. I glued it with hot glue. Paul sent me the things a while later. I sort of glued them into place. And then I had this white Foamex church with no roof yet. And then I covered the whole thing in polyfiller. I tested beforehand with the polyfiller brand. I use Dial, No Nonsense, or whatever, B&Q. But I tested first to make sure it actually sticks to Foamex, because some brands don't stick as well. So if that's the case, what I do is I put a coat of PVA on first, and that gives a key for the polyfiller. But put polyfiller on it, and then I use a mixture of I have a Green Stuff World brick roller.
Yeah,
rolling.
Seen those. Yeah.
And I use that, but what they can't do is when you've got like a buttress, the curve of the rolling pin means that you can't get right into that corner, right? So I made a little mini brick press from what's it made out of? It's like polystyrene and bits of coffee stirrers. It's a bit crappy, right? But it's only small, but it's just so that when the rolling pin has reached the end and it can't get in that corner, I can press just to give the continuation of the brickwork. And that was all done. That was all the polyfiller done. And then I added things like cardboard windowsills and little like architectural details. And then what I do with them is I cover them in like a slurry of polyfiller to give them a stone effect and also to blend their edge in with the rest of the building. Then the whole thing gets undercoated with like a brown spray primer. And then I get cheap household emulsions from like, B&Q, whatever. I've mentioned B&Q quite a lot. I should be.
Yeah. I'm going to say we might get monetized.
B&Q DIY.com, yeah. And so I paint in like, general beigey, sort of like warm beigey colours. And then I use a wash from a company called Flory, who they make washes for Airfix type models. But they're like clay-based washes, and they're brilliant. They dry really quick. You put them on, then you can damp cloth to remove excess bits and stuff. And then I dry brush bits up, and then do the weathering, which is streaks of like other washes and stipples of brown and stuff for like rising damp around the base. And the roof was made out of Foamex, and I used laser cut paper strips to make roof tiles, and that was painted. And then I weathered it with lichen by getting a wet paintbrush and like flicking it vigorously at the rooftop, so it gave a spattering of sort of yellow and white lichen. And that was it. That was the church.
Yeah. So just a few things kind of dropping out of that there. So you talked about scale. So and you mentioned quite rightly that if we did buildings to the scale that they actually are, it fills the table. So there's kind of always a little scaling down with buildings for the table. Do you have a set formula for that, or is it kind of by eye that you work?
It's basically by eye, but I use doorways as a reference point.
Yeah.
So I sort of go, for a 28mm figure, I normally do a 3cm door, roughly sort of 3cm door, which is enough of a scaling that you can normally. It's like really, it's like when you look at a building. If you look at a model building, what you're really judging if the building feels too small is if the doors and the windows look too small for your figures.
Right. Yes.
Right. So you can shrink a building by 20% under scale. If the doors are the right size for your figures, the building won't look out of scale. So, like, for example, Warlord released for their Berlin box set. They had these plastic Berlin apartment buildings, right? And they're actually massively under scale. They're like 20. They're from the Italeri 20mm range or whatever, right? So they're really small, and they look particularly out of proportion because the doors are really small. So the soldiers are as tall as these grand doors on this apartment blocks, right? But if they had shrunk it, but they had kept the doors appropriately sized, it doesn't look out of place. If you go out into the street now and you saw a man standing taller than a door, right, you'd either go, that's a really big bloke, or that's a really small house, right? And so using the doors and the windows as keeping those consistent with your minis allows you to shrink the building without the building feeling wrong.
Yeah. Oh, that's it. That's a good tip. That I like that one. From my previous experience, which was many years ago, of actually trying to scratch build a to building, I always had problems with things like walls warping inwards, and I'd put it together and it'd fall apart. So is there? It's not going well, this is it. So is there anything that you do to strengthen the buildings? Do you put bracing in it, or is it the materials that you use that bring the strength?
I think it's materials. So I think if you use non-warping materials, so like the warping happens mainly because it absorbs moisture on one side, and that makes it shrink. Or you use a material that itself shrinks when it dries, and that creates tension across the surface, and then it warps. Right. So I use polyfiller that is non-shrinking polyfiller, and so when it dries, it doesn't force any tension across the surface. And I use either polystyrene or Foamex, which are both non-absorbent materials, and so you don't get warping with those. What you can get is it's not warping, but it's bending under their own weight if the span is too big. So on rooftops, I do put triangular bracing at intervals along inside the roof. The walls generally, though, I mean, often anyway, the structure, you don't really generally have a big enough expanse of these materials without a bend or some change in the structure anyway that would need that. But generally, I think choice of materials means that you can avoid those things.
I was using carbon flake packets and things like that. So
Yeah, cardboard is a bad one, right?
Yeah.
One of my first scratch builds a long time ago, as 5 years ago, right? Back when I was a lad,
Yeah.
was I built a roof out of cardboard, and that was a big mistake because
Mm.
I painted it, and by the time I had painted it and put some washes and stuff on it, it was.
There we go. So we had a little bit of a technical issue, which I've solved. Well, I've bypassed. Let's just leave it at that. So we were talking, Joe, about building buildings, and
Yeah.
we talked a little bit about the scaling. So one of the other things that you mentioned was weathering,
Mm.
which for me can make or break a building. Sometimes, things can be underweathered and it looks like a toy, or it can be overweathered and it just looks a mess. So, what's your kind of golden rules for weathering, and how do you go about it?
Well, I think before you weather, you need to have made sure that the colours initially are to avoid this sort of toy thing, is make sure the colours are suitably desaturated and lighter, right? So like there's a sort of a rule of scale modeling of like you lighten things by about 10% when you scale things, right? Because if you do things full color, they look and they're small, they just look wrong. They don't look like they're correct. So starting with the right color on your building in the first place is important. Weathering is really hard to weather if things are too bright or too colorful. So I think what you want to do with weathering is you want to give the right visual texture to
Yeah.
that's another very arty thing, that visual texture. I like it. I just made it up. I like it. Yeah. Anyway, visual texture, right? To the thing. So as in that you break up, because real weathering breaks up surfaces. You see different colors coming in. You see different textures, different places. But also, it's really important as well that you don't just weather randomly. You tell the story of actually what's happened to this building, right? Why it's weathered in this place. So, from a scientific point of view, because I was a science teacher, but also my degree was I'm a geologist by degree training stuff, and we did a lot of about weathering, right? And so essentially, what happens with weathering is all the building materials that you ever make or use in real life are metastable. They're always trying to break down. They the chemical bonds that you formed are not the most stable form for these things, and entropy increases and things disorder. Right? So that's always going to happen to any material once it's exposed to the world, and you want to sort of think, well, okay, what's the material made? What's actually made from? So when you're modeling it as a scale model thing, what's it really made from in real life, and what would happen if this thing was left out for X number of years, right? And one big weathering power on in the world is plants, right? Plants and biological weathering is a huge factor in weathering things. And if you look at anything in the real world, you immediately look carefully. There's plants or lichen and algae and things on those materials, right? Straight away you notice. And every single garden or patio or paving area has got weeds growing around the edges and the corners. It's just there, and you might not notice it immediately, but if you part of the visual that you see when you see a wall or a patio or a floor, part of that thing that says to you, this is a normal real place and not like a showroom, is because there's plants there, right? There's things in the corners and stuff, and so if you make a model of a garden or a patio or a paving area or a garden square or town square or whatever, it's going to look wrong unless you remember part of the visual on that is little bits of plants, right? So having that thing like that, well, those things really exist, and that's part of it. Also, then when you're weathering things, like streaks of like dirt and stuff, where's that come from, right? So when you look at a roof and you think, well, when it's raining, where's the water going to come down, right? Where's it going to come from? Is it going to hit the wall? Is it going to run down the wall? is it going to gather at certain corners on windowsills, around drain pipes, those sort of things? What pattern does it form as it comes down from those places? And oh, look, it's going to carry dirt with it. It's going to wash dirt down. It's going to leave that, or it's going to have salt evaporate on the surface. It's going to leave white marks there. Or it's rising damp, and when it rises up, you either have, because the walls are damp, material dust sticks to it from road traffic, or it allows the environment allows plants and algae and stuff to climb up the walls, right? So that's why you get then those things at the bases. So you need to sort of tell the story. If you just randomly blotch on grass, like flock and stuff, it looks wrong because without even realizing what when you look at a real building, you would notice if there was some weird plant growing in a weird place on the wall, right? Or like it was stained in some strange way. But part of what tells your brain this is a normal building is because you're so used to seeing those things. You're so used to seeing dirt in certain places and stuff that it looks right. So that building has those things. And if you forget to do that on your models or you randomly apply those things, it will jump out to your inner brain of going, well, that's not how buildings look.
So I think people are recognizing differences. They're not necessarily looking for things that are wrong, but their brain's telling them that I've never seen that before.
No, exactly.
And that's what's drawing you to things.
Yeah. So you're, when you're out and about in your day-to-day life, being a human, and you're looking at stuff, your brain is, you're recording memories of how things look, right? And your brain shortcuts things, and it goes, well, I assume this will be these places and stuff. And when things aren't in those places, jumps out, and it's like, and obviously that's not to say that sometimes particular buildings have oddities in how they've weathered, right? And you see a certain real building, and because of the particular microclimate for that building, or they patched that bit up at some point and it's not the same age as the rest of the building, or whatever the reasons are, or literally some bloke once chucked a bucket of water on that wall and it made that wall down, right? So that sort of stuff. But generally, and those things stand out, but generally you're used to seeing certain things, and you expect to see certain things even without knowing what you're expecting to see when you see a building. And so part of the weathering, I think it's important, is trying to drill down into yourself and go, what is it that I'm expecting to see when I see an old building? And if the building is really old, well, what do I expect to see? How do I know? How do I know when I see an old wall that it's an old wall and not a wall that was built 10 years ago, right? And obviously that also then feeds into pre-weathering, like the actual construction techniques of, if you want to model a 19th century French farmhouse, and you also want to model a 20th century modern suburban house, right? You need to think, well, actually what materials are different, how are they building it differently? And I could show a person a picture of these two buildings and say which one's older, right? And without knowing any history, you go, that's really old, that's an older building, right? And what is it that makes it older? Well, I'm not sure. I just know it's older. But if you think about it properly, you go, okay, material, this is stone, it's not very even. The windows are smaller, the roof is this sort of shape, and so on, right? That also then extends to when you're doing regional differences between buildings. So you go, okay, well, everyone has seen Normandy farmhouses, right? It's a classic look. But then how do you, okay, well, the houses around Dunkirk and sort of Calais and stuff, they're different. They're still French houses, but they're not the same as a Normandy farmhouse. And being able to go, okay, look at those, how's it different? Oh, the roof shape's different. They use more brick. They use these different sort of tiles. The roof angle's different, and they don't have the chimneys in the same place, and all those sort of things. Oh, they like shutters. They don't like shutters, and that sort of stuff, right? So if you note those things, then when you come to making and not making of even a generic building for those things, if you can tune into what makes it feel like that place, then others who see your table or see your stuff will pick up the same cues and will go, that feels like Normandy because I've seen Normandy before, and this is how it feels. And that then extends with the weathering. You paint them and you weather them to tell the story, a realistic story. You think, well, what's happened to this building? It's by a road. It's got a drain pipe. It's going to have these streets and stuff. And that helps people to buy into it being a thing. Like Stalingrad table that I did recently, Salute. What was quite fun there was these are brick buildings and stuff, and the insides. It's quite a small point, but I really like the fact that the insides of the buildings were whitewashed brick, right? And people who saw it and said to me things like, I really, really love the whitewashing inside the building, right?
Yeah.
And they couldn't quite say why they liked it so much. And I think what I think I liked about it was it really, when you think about an old factory, and I went to school in the 80s, and my school was built in the 30s, and it was sort of classic brick, big brick, 1930s E-wing sort of building, and that feel of being in those buildings with the whitewashed brick, painted brick, and you see the brick everywhere, and then also they use the same sort of shade of green, almost like a racing, like a muted racing green, right, on doors and on like below the picture rails and stuff. And those color palettes are classic 1930s color palettes, the white wall and then the greens and stuff. And then so I had that inside the factories. So the outside buildings were, with these, basic industrial brick outsides. The insides had these like streaky, messy white bits where the whitewash had like worn away because the building's exposed and burnt away and stuff. And seeing that, I think just made people feel like being inside a 1930s building.
Yeah.
And it was a little detail that I think helped tell the story of this. This was once a painted inside factory. People worked in here, and it was in the same way they paint inside schools. Now it's a shell. So yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it's certainly a sort of a high level of observation that you're putting into it that maybe people are subconsciously recognizing that if when it's wrong, it's wrong, but when it's right, your eyes drawn to it. The weathering itself, then, I found this with the naval modelling that I do. There is a bewildering amount of weathering stuff out there. There's pigments, there's washes, there's powders, there's pin liners. Do you use that sort of stuff, or do you use more of a sort of a homebrew type effect?
My weathering stuff is essentially 3 products, and that's it, right? And I do nearly all the weathering with just these 3 things. So the first one, and that's the best one for me, is these flory clay washes.
Yeah.
And I use them on all the buildings. They're brilliant. I use a color called brine, and I just slop it onto the buildings and use a damp cloth to remove the bulk of it. But it mutes things. It shades recesses. It gives a grubbiness to it all. So I use that as my base thing, and then I use mainly Agrax Earthshade, but also Athonian Camo Shade, which are 2 Games Workshop washes for rising damp and streaky rain streak bits and stuff. And then I use like a yellowy ochre for lichen on the roof. I spat that on with a brush, and that is 90% of my weathering. I'll be just like, I'll stipple on muddy things sometimes, but and sometimes like really muddy things, I've sometimes mixed polyfiller with brown paint to make a slightly thicker mud that sort of sets. But that's only on particular examples. The bulk of my weathering is the washes, and then there's the spattery lichen bits, which is really not much, not lots of fancy technique.
Yeah, I think as we said earlier on, sometimes you can go over the top with it, and if you buy buckets of different weathering powders and washes and things, then that's when I think when you're using too many, that's when it can become too much. Once you've done all that and you've got your building together and you're happy with it, do you then use a varnish on it at all, or do you leave it naked, so to speak?
It's naked, apart from I've sometimes, if Games Workshop recently changed the formula on their washes, and they're all a bit glossy now, right?
Yeah.
So if I've used the washes on the roof or something, and I think it's a bit of a sheen, then I'll put a matte varnish on it. But otherwise no. I think having a matte, you want to avoid a sheen looks wrong, right? The reflections are always out of scale buildings. So if the thing looks too shiny, that draws your eye to it being a model.
Yeah.
So a matte surface is best. But generally it's only if I find that one of the washes has left a glossy sheen.
Yeah.
Otherwise, no.
No, right, no worries at all. So we've got our buildings together then. How do you put that on into a table? How do you, do the groundwork to get one building into a street?
Okay, so if you're doing a street, if I'm doing like Normandy urban sort of town things and villages and things, I my like base mat is this big teddy fur, a big 15-foot sheet of teddy bear fur that I shaved.
Got a bit of bear fur shaving.
Oh man, it's such a mess. Right, it is such a mess. I bought like a dog hair trimmer thing for it,
Yeah.
and I was like, it's 15 foot long. This sheet, right? So I was in my living room, very small living room, and I had to do it in like 3-foot strips at a time, right?
Yeah.
And I was doing this stuff, and I thought I was being really tidy with like picking all the little bits up as I was going. I was, oh, there'll be no mess at all for my wife. There'll be no mess. Don't worry, it's all good, right? And then like I sort of picked it up, and then like a billion microfibers of this went everywhere. Like it just covered every surface. I was like, this is bad. But so once I did that, it was like I've done that. I'll work outside next time. But I did that, and then it was a really hot summer's day, and I took it outside and sprayed it with household emulsions. You know those gardeners pressure pumped pesticide spray things, right? So I bought one of those, and I made up a emulsion water mix with a bit of washing up liquid to break the surface tension on the fibers, and I sprayed that out, and in a sort of random sort of way, and that dried, and I sort of rubbed it in with rubber gloves and mished it around it and stuff, and that was great. So that's my like main map thing for most most sort of like Northwest Europe tables. If I'm doing urban stuff, my Stalingrad table, I used yoga mats,
Right. Yeah.
the interlocking yoga mats. So I bought
Yeah.
20 of those, and I essentially just smeared acrylic cork onto it, which is super sticky, adheres to everything. And when it was damp, I rolled a textured rolling pin to give a bricky sort of cobblestone thing, and painted them up, and they're a bit of sand, a bit of PTA and stuff. So let's say Normandy stuff, for example. Then so I've made this teddy bear mat. The roads are either going to be, I use latex roads from early war miniatures, or I make them from Fomex if I need to do like particular layouts. And then trees and bocage and stuff, I make those from rubberized horsehair, which I buy from. I go on eBay, and it's like an upholsterer's company that sells it, and so they are really quick to make. You basically just glue them onto either tree armature or onto a strip of polystyrene as a base for like bocage and stuff. Paint those brown with a spray paint, and then glue on flock, turf, and stuff like that. Yeah, and
so
then,
you choose to do those yourself then, rather than go to a company. You prefer to do everything
I like making
yourself.
I like making stuff myself. The most I do really is get Paul to print me little scatter things. I like making it, and I think as well, people can make a lot of stuff themselves if they, with scraps and stuff. I made I was bored one day, and I thought I'm gonna make a little well. I haven't got a well for my little village.
Yeah.
And I found a little off-cut polystyrene, cut it into a cylinder, and scored a little brick pattern on it and stuff, and used matchsticks to make a little roof for the well cover. And it took about half hour, 40 minutes, and it was a nice little piece, And I do like I made this stuff.
Yeah, no, it's a big difference and a big personal thing, isn't it? That
Yeah.
I've done all that rather than bought this bits and pieces here and there. Do you find that, having been to a show, and I'm just going to go through this tomorrow, that you spend a lot of time repairing stuff, or is yours robust enough to see you through a salute game?
I think it's quite robust. I did have. I mean, I actually had to do a repair the day before salute because I dropped something myself. Right, I was gutted. I was at my lockup thing collecting my Stalingrad terrain, and I was all on a trolley, all piled in this trolley, and I caught the corner as I came round with this big trolley, and the box fell off, and I was like, no! And this factory I had made with all these like girders and stuff, right, had like snapped all these bits off. Yeah. So I fixed it. I went home and I was like, my wife said, "Oh, all good?" And I was like, "No, I've broken a thing. Oh no!" And this and that sort of salute. So I fixed that. I used, fixed it up and I patched it together and put polyfiller to hide the break and stuff. But I don't think I've had really any breaks. But I do carry with me a hot glue gun, and super glue, for because obviously things can happen. And I had when I started doing shows, I had to mentally tell myself to be ready for the fact that stuff might get broken. Right? If I never, if I want to guarantee that it won't get broken, don't take it to a show.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Although that said, do you know what? Right? My brother-in-law doesn't really wargame anymore, right? Because he won't be listening. But I had just started. I had my third game, and I invited him round to play a game. And I had this all these like newly painted Germans, right? And he's playing, and he knocks them off the floor by accident.
Oh.
And as he goes to recover them, he crushes them under his feet. All right. I was like, man, anyway. So it's not safe at home either. But anyway, but yeah, I have to accept that if I go to a show and stuff can happen. Fingers crossed, it hasn't happened so far. But I do take with me repair stuff just in case.
Yeah, because you tend to do participation games, don't you? So
yeah,
you're even there's that increased level of if you're playing with a group of mates, they hopefully will show a degree of respect for your stuff. But with participation games, you're opening it up to people who might not be wargamers, who are trying it out and maybe don't realise that some of this stuff isn't actually concrete or anything like that.
There was it's with minis more than the terrain bit. There was, and this goes on to what we were saying earlier about encouraging kids to take up the hobby and stuff. I was at a show and I was running a game, a chain of command game, and this kid was playing, and I said, right, okay, you can deploy your squad or whatever, right? So he went to the box where all the guys were, and he just he took them all, right, and they were all like neatly in their little organizer, and he just sort of brought them over in his hand, all like all the blokes all like mashed together, right? And I was thinking, part of me was thinking, oh no, it might get chipped, right? But I knew that if I had gone, oh no, be careful with those, then that kid would have disengaged and felt like, oh, I can't touch this stuff. This is, And I wanted him to enjoy. He was having a great game with his dad, and it was his first ever war game. He was really enjoying it. And so I was like, it's a small, this kid enjoying this thing at a show he's come to. It's just, I can fix a chip. I can fix a broken gun if needed to. I didn't want to go to the kid, oh no, careful with my toys, So I've accepted that if it breaks, I can fix it.
Oh, that's a good one. So if we've got people listening who maybe don't do a lot of terrain. Ken holds his hand up. What would be some sort of top tips, or what would be some advice that you would give to people who are?
Well, I would start small and do some scatter. Right, that's like everyone's table is enhanced by some scatter that tells a little story. Right, so whatever theatre you're doing, things like barrels and crates and boxes and things like that. I mean, you can even start with just the lowest level terrain, I guess, is basing up little things into little mini scatter dioramas that you can place on the table, right? That's the lowest level. So you can just buy some 3D printed or resin or MDF street furniture, boxes, crates, wagons, whatever and stuff, and just put them on a little base, put them together, paint them up, add little turf flocks and lithographs, tassographs and those sort of things and stuff. And then you can then progress to go, okay, well, how about a little outbuilding for things, and you don't need to spend a lot of money. I mean, a good source of things is to rob coffee shops of their stirrers. Right?
Yep.
Every time my with my car, my on my dashboard, the sort of like storage thing on the front of the dashboard is just full of coffee stirrers, and the central console where the phone charger bit goes and stuff is full of coffee stirrers, right? They're great. So coffee stirrers, you can make fencing with coffee stirrers. You can make the simplest of little buildings and then just clad it in these things. You can make little wagons, they're a great thing. And then once you've got those little scatter things built, then try and tackle it. Actually, a good step up to it is to buy an MDF kit, do something to it to raise it from MDF kit, right? So you might think, well, I've got this MDF kit, I'm just going to change the roof into roof tiles, right? So buy a set of laser cut roof tiles or a sheet of like Will's plastic roof tiles, sort of styrene sheet things, and make the roof fancier. Or go, right, I'm going to glaze the windows. So glazing windows, I use acetate sheets and I glue them inside. Or you might say, I'm going to make a little garden for this house, right? So you've got the MDF house, and then just, you can make a generic garden that is just walls on 3 sides. And you can buy the walls. You can just buy a set of MDF for resin walls or something from Debris of War, glue them onto a sheet of MDF or a sheet of Foamex, bit of poly filler to make up some like earth banks and things, and then flock it, and then you've got a little garden wall to go with it, right? And that makes that building suddenly not just a building plonked onto the table, but actually it makes it someone's house with a garden. Then you can think, okay, well, can I improve the texture of the MDF building? Well, I might put poly filler on it, or I might buy a sheet of textured card and glue that onto it. And that's the sort of I started by texturing MDF kit before I tackled scratch building, and that's a good stepstone to then doing that. I think it's getting familiar, getting comfortable with making your own terrain, making terrain that you have some hand in. It's a really satisfying thing.
Yeah, it's definitely better than trying to go off and build Hougoumont in 28mm or something like that.
Yeah.
Because you very quickly then lose heart.
Regret that. Exactly.
So something small and achievable that you can complete in a relatively quick
exactly
space.
Yeah, you don't want it'd be depressing to like decide to build some huge model and start it, and then it starts to go wrong, or you run out of time, or or other hobby interests are like, well, that's also pulling me in that direction and stuff, and you're stuck with it, right? You can do a thing that you can get done in a day or two, then that's a thing you've got in your that's now available to you to play with, and it really helps you then move on to the next bit.
Yeah. You've done your Normandy table, your Stalingrad table at Salute. What are you planning on? What are you working on at the moment?
Well, I was my original plan got sort of bumped along a little bit by a holiday, which inspired me. We went to Netherlands last month, and sort of just traveling we did Eurostar, so we traveled by train through Netherlands, and I was like, oh, this is a good landscape, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, I've seen the brilliant Lardy's tables of Arnhem itself. I was like, well, I'm quite keen on just doing rural Netherlands. So so that's the current plan. It's on hold slightly because my eldest is doing GCSEs at the moment, and so the dining room table where I normally do my crafting is off limits, and so I was like, well, okay, I'll just pause for a month or so. So that's the plan. Rural Netherlands software. So making sort of like polder terrain and embankments, ditches and windmills and those sort of things. That's that. But my longer term plan is to try and do Tobruk. So
brilliant.
A 15-foot table of the Tobruk harbour. So when Tobruk falls, the Germans basically race through Tobruk and reach the harbour, and that's like the big, that's the end of it. And so I was keen on doing a table that goes from desert. Because obviously most Tobruk games are just empty desert with some barbed wire and some trenches and no real town to it, sort of thing. But I was keen on actually trying to get to town. So my goal is to do a table that's at one end is edge of town, like smaller,
Mm.
like mud hut brick houses, and then goes through into like an Italian quarter with admin buildings and stuff, and then warehouses, and then the dock itself. And that would be a very cool setup, and so different from Normandy and Russia,
Yeah.
Stalingrad and Germany and stuff. So that's the plan. I reckon my goal maybe is to have maybe run that for Salute next year to do for it.
Oh well,
That's the
that'd
plan.
be an absolutely superb table. If people want to see the stuff that you're doing, then what's you're on Twitter, aren't you? So what's
Yeah, so
the
I'm it
yeah
says Joe underscore Wargamer.
yeah? And do you do anything else like Facebook or anything like that?
Uh,
YouTube channels or anything?
no, the people have said to me like, "Oh, you should do a YouTube thing." I was like, "No, just all
Yeah,
that will be time I can't could be spending, making
yeah.
buildings." No, just only Twitter. I'm Facebook. I never got
You're
onto. So
you're a one social media brand
I
man.
am. You can find me in one place. Yeah, just on Twitter. But
Exclusive content.
it is. It
Um,
is, and you can subscribe to my to my to my Twitter. Yeah,
it's been wonderful talking to you today, Joe. Thank you very much for your time.
you're very welcome.
I always leave my guests a chance at the end to ask me a question if they have one. If you don't, I'll quite happily go away happy.
I have
But if
one
you got a
question.
question, I'll go
I
for
have.
it then.
What would you put in Room 101?
Oh God, there's 1,000 things.
What's your absolute? If you were like you had a gun to your head and someone said you got 5 seconds to answer, your gut
Yeah,
reaction is
12-figure cavalry regiments at the
okay.
moment. Because I've been brought up on, I build my armies to historical order of battles.
Hmm,
So I decide on a figure scale in terms of numbers of men to a
yeah.
figure. So 20 to 1, 33 to 1 are the classic ones. So I will do my regiments to whatever it is. So let's
Hmm,
say French cavalry, Waterloo, about 400 men per unit.
hmm,
So 20 to 1, God, 20 figures, isn't it?
hmm,
So, what I don't like is when the units, the number of figures in a unit doesn't represent proportionally the number of men.
hmm.
So you'll have a Land Air cavalry unit with 250 men, 12 figures. French Guard cavalry unit, 1,000 men, 12 figures. It's just irrational, but it drives me
Hmm.
mad. And that's what I like about Wargames. You just get a little tick. It's,
Yeah.
"Ooh,
Oh, what's that?
don't like them. I don't like them." So that's my current one, but it could change. It
Could
could
change.
change
Okay, well that's
tomorrow.
fine. Yeah.
So it's been lovely talking to you today, mate, and I'm sure we'll catch up next time we're at a show. So if you'd
Yep.
just like to say good night to the audience,
Good night, audience.
good night, everyone.
Well, thank you very much, Joe. That was a lovely episode there, and hopefully that's infused us all to do a little bit more with our terrain. I love it when a guest is really sort of positive about what we're talking about and comes up with lots of different ideas that we can all use in our wargaming as well. I have often said that I, neglect the terrain for for painting and for the figures, so it was lovely to hear that. And at the end of the episode there, you'll have noticed a change in the sound quality. And I've been recording with a company called Podcastle, and I've been able to use their free method of recording, but that's just changed recently that I wasn't aware of. So the show cut off, and I had to do like an emergency end of recording on Zoom, which only allows you to do 40 minutes at a time. So I'm currently, I think, sadly, after 3.5 years, I'm actually going to have to pay to do the recording. I already pay about £100 a year to host the recordings and keep them in the cloud, etc., so that you can download them all with Podbean. But unfortunately, they only do recording on an app, which is done through a mobile phone, and the sound recording quality is just not what I'm after. So I'm on the lookout at the moment for alternatives. Unfortunately, I think most of them are going to cost. So that would it's probably going to add another couple of $100, which is nearly a couple of £100 these days, onto the cost of the podcast. So I'm having to think about that. Thinking about how I'm going to do it, and I don't want to go to a Patreon scheme where people, things are behind paywalls and stuff like that. But I do need to consider how I'm going to fund the podcast going forward. I'm not going to disappear. It will go forward. I just need to think about a way of doing it. And I'm also a little bit restricted with how I raise money due to my employment. So, I will be back next month, or this month even, in June. I've got a couple of episodes I want to get out before July, or before the middle of July anyway. And the first one, as you know, I'm only doing planning a couple ahead at a time. The first one, I'm going to be speaking to Pete from the Assault Group, or TAG as they are better known. And they are a manufacturer of some of the best 28mm Renaissance figures, including a fantastic selection of Italian Wars figures, which I have many in my own collection. So I'm really looking forward to that. And then I know for a fact that it's going to be a Brews in the Vineyard summer special after that. And we will be doing another World Cup. And it's going to be a World Cup of historical miniature manufacturers. So I'm just going to whet your appetite with that now. And there will be more details on Facebook is where I'm going to start it, for reasons I will explain on Facebook. But if you're not part of the group already, there is a Yorkshire Gamer Big Wargames group on Facebook, which a lot of people who are listeners to the podcast join in on, and lots of people who aren't as well. I don't quite know why, but they do come along, and they obviously like the big figure collections and stuff that we do, even though they don't listen to the podcast. Maybe I should charge them to join the Facebook group. There's an idea. So, once again, have a fantastic time listening to this episode. I hope you've enjoyed it. Have a great time with your wargaming and painting and general hobbying. It's a fantastic way to relax and take away the stress of a job, or a health issue, or whatever it is that bugs your life. Do your gaming, have a great smile on your face while you're doing it. And until next time, Sithee.